Everybody, and welcome to the 2026 National Hurricane Conference Amateur Radio Hurricane Communication Workshop. I'll be your moderator, and I'll also be presenting on the VoIP Hurricane Net. And for all you folks in Florida, it may sound crazy, but I'm going to talk also a little bit about the blizzard that we had up in New England in February of 2026, because believe it or not, there's some interesting similarities of how they can look on a satellite image and how we respond to them. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today as well. A couple of things I want to note. So first of all, for folks that are attending the Hurricane Conference, we were told by the organizers the description that's in the actual program is incorrect. That said, we are going to be talking quite a bit about how amateur radio helps with communications when things fail, and also how they augment things when they are still up. And I'll walk through the agenda now with that said about the mistake within the workshop topics within the program. We're going to start off talking a little bit about the meteorology, so look at the 2025 hurricane season in review. Might talk a little bit about the upcoming season as well. Then, and that's from Bob Robichaud, VE1MBR, who works for the Canadian Hurricane Center as the warning preparedness meteorologist, similar to the warning coordination meteorologists at local National Weather Service offices. We then have Brad Reinhardt, senior hurricane specialist with the Hurricane Center, who's going to talk about how amateur radio collaboration happens at the National Hurricane Center. And then we have WD4R, Julio Ripoll, 46 years of amazing service at the National Hurricane Center and the founder of the amateur radio station at the National Hurricane Center, who will give an overview. And then we'll do the Hurricane WatchNet overview from Bobby Graves, KB5HAV. Now, unfortunately, and our prayers are with Bobby, he had an unexpected medical issue, so what we have is a video presentation that's a little over 20 minutes that gives an overview on the net from last year's conference that we're going to show given Bobby's situation. I told you about my topics around the VoIP Hurricane Net, best practices in tropical systems, and talking a little bit about the blizzard back home where I live in Massachusetts. We then have the Salvation Army Team Emergency Radio Network, who will present their program. We're lucky to have Josh Johnston, KE5MHV, here from ARRL to talk a bit about updates from emergency management from a league perspective, and then we'll have moderated QA session and door prizes. I'll also mention, so we're going to do our break, really important for folks to get back right at 3:30, and I'll just leave it at that. Some folks might have overheard some things, but we have kind of a unexpected topic on the agenda that everybody I think will want to see. So with that, we'll get right into it here. We're going to try to be as on time as possible. We've gone a little over at times in the workshop. I'm going to try to keep us as close to on time, though we are going to have a couple of special presentations, so we will do the best that we can. I think what we'll do, except for maybe, I don't know how long Brad will be here, we may have a short pause for questions then, but afterwards, let's try to do all the questions kind of at the end of the session. We're going to try to do our best to make sure we have that roughly 20-minute window of questions at the end of the workshop. So with that, let's get into presentations. We'll start off with VE1MBR, Bob Robichaud from the Canadian Hurricane Center.
Thanks, Rob.
Welcome.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to be back here in Orlando presenting at the National Hurricane Conference. So this is a hurricane conference, after all, even if it's an amateur radio session within the conference. So good to start off in talking about hurricanes. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. For the next 25 minutes or so, just give a brief overview of the Canadian Hurricane Center, what we do there, how we interact with the National Hurricane Center. Look back at last season, and then we'll kind of look ahead for what we might expect this hurricane season by looking at some of the factors that drive hurricanes. And then we'll look at some of the early outlooks for the season that have already come out and in the process of coming out over the next few weeks. So a little bit about us at the Canadian Hurricane Center. A lot of people don't quite realize that we do have a Canadian Hurricane Center. It's located in Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is part of Atlantic Canada. A fair distance from us here in Orlando, and although we do get colder conditions up there, and I'm looking forward to hear about Rob's presentation on the blizzard that also affected us a few weeks ago. What we do is we monitor all the storms in the Atlantic, but we don't necessarily message all of them. We leave that to the folks at the National Hurricane Center. But what we have is a response zone, and whenever a storm is expected to enter that response zone, which is delineated there in red, that's when we kind of kick into gear and we provide special focus on that storm and potential impacts in Canada. So we also issue hurricane watches and warnings, same for tropical storm watches and warnings for Canada, and we collaborate with the Hurricane Center with those watches and warnings, but also just on the forecast in general. And we also do some training every year. We send 2 of our forecasters down to Miami every spring for some special forecaster training. We also help with coordinate some CanWarn activities, which is our version of SKYWARN. So if any of you were here yesterday, there was a comment made in the general session about it's tough to plan for the future if you don't look back and see what occurred previously. So that's what I'm going to do now, is kind of take a look back at last season, how that season, that hurricane season unfolded. So the predictions, there are lots of predictions out there, but the predictions that were issued in May of last year were for 13 to 19 storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 5 major hurricanes. And we got 13 named storms, 5 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes. So right around the average, maybe a little bit below average for the number of storms. But as you'll see, not every average hurricane season from a number of storm perspective is created equal, because we had a lot of kind of things that occurred last year that I'll talk a little bit about as I go along. So Melissa is the only name that will be retired from the list from last year. Of course, it was the strongest storm of the year, which again I'll get into in a second. This is kind of how the season unfolded. It started fairly as a fairly typical season with a few weak storms early on. And then things started to pick up a little bit. Then, like we've seen the last couple of years, we had a lull kind of at the end of August into early September. But then things started to pick up again, and the latter part of the season was kind of loaded with a series of 7 hurricanes to finish off the year, including, again, Melissa, that was the strongest storm of the year. So we had some impacts, some landfall, land impacts last year. Barry was one of the first ones, resulted in 8 direct fatalities due to flooding and rough surf in Mexico. Chantal was a tropical storm that made landfall in South Carolina, but resulted in 6 fatalities in North Carolina. And what we see from time to time is a pretty strong right hand turn in the track of these storms, and they head out towards Europe. And we saw some impacts from post-tropical storm Gabrielle in the Azores last year. Imelda was another one, 2 flooding related fatalities in Cuba last year. And then, of course, we had 2 major hurricane landfalls, both from the same storm, Melissa. Melissa made landfall as a strong Category 5 in Jamaica at the end of the season on October 28th. The next day, it made another landfall as a major hurricane, but this time in Cuba as a Category 3. So 2 major hurricane landfalls, but from the same hurricane. Last year was also a banner year for rapid intensification. Rapid intensification is defined as a 30-knot increase in wind speed or a 30-knot increase in intensity in a 24-hour period. And we saw that in spades with a few of these storms last year. Aaron intensified 75 knots in 24 hours, so double the threshold. And Aaron reached Category 5. We had Gabrielle, 50 knots in 24 hours, which reached Category 4. Umberto, 55 knots in 24 hours. And then, of course, Melissa, 55 knots in 24 hours, and a whopping 105 knots in just 3 days. So it went from a kind of a low-end tropical storm to a Category 5 in a very, very, relatively speaking, short period of time. But the folks at the National Hurricane Center did a bang-up job in forecasting that rapid intensification. But we still ended up with a very, very impactful storm, 93 fatalities across the Caribbean with Melissa from last year. And just a few more stats here on Melissa. 45 fatalities in Jamaica. This is as of the NHC report that was issued at the end of February. We have $8.8 billion in damage, but we got a presentation yesterday from officials in Jamaica that now have that value up to about 12 billion US dollars. 43 fatalities in Haiti and fatalities in the Dominican Republic and Cuba as well. So very, very intense hurricane, tied for the strongest maximum sustained winds at 165 knots. Tied with, tied basically for the strongest hurricane in the Atlantic, tied with Allen in 1980. Tied for the strongest landfall at 160 knots. Tied for the third lowest minimum central pressure at 892 millibars. And it was also the second lowest landfall pressure at 897 millibars. So in a year where we had, some people would say, only 13 named storms, one of them was this monster. So you can't always go by the number of storms that we get over a season to really get a good idea on how bad that season is going to be, because every season is kind of created differently. So just for the, in terms of the season last year, you kind of see the trend in the tracks here where they all curved very, very sharply towards the east and northeast. That was because we had a very strong area of high pressure over the northeastern part of the continent, resulted in drought conditions in much of into New England and even into eastern Canada. Where at the point it created very, very severe fire behavior, weather conditions in a huge part of eastern Canada, to the point where people were actually praying for a hurricane to come and provide some relief from that drought that we had last year. So those are the stats from last year, and you can see that how it compares to the previous year in 2024. So with that, we'll kind of take a look ahead at what we might expect this year. So there are a number of things that we look at to get an idea of how active a hurricane season is going to be. And I'm not going to cover all of them here, but I'm just going to cover some of the larger scale ones. One is wind shear in the tropical Atlantic. Hurricanes don't like an environment where the winds change with altitude. As you go up in the atmosphere, what we're looking for is fairly uniform winds as you head up higher in the atmosphere. The other, obviously, is water temperature in the Atlantic. The reason we have hurricanes is to dissipate that extra energy that's stored as heat in the ocean. So the warmer the waters, everything else being equal, typically the more storms you're going to get and the more powerful those storms are going to be. So looking at water temperature is fairly straightforward. Looking at wind shear may not be quite as straightforward. In terms of wind shear, we typically see wind shear increase in the wintertime, not only in the tropics, but in the mid-latitudes as well. But over the course of the summer, especially in the tropics, that wind shear decreases, and that allows for these storms to develop, because a lot of times the water temperature, even in the winter, is warm enough to support some level of tropical activity. It's the wind shear that just is too strong to support that. So over the course of the summer, we see a significant drop in wind shear, and it bottoms out towards the end of the summer. Meanwhile, the water temperature is increasing. So you end up with that period in September, statistically speaking, September 10th is the peak of hurricane season, right between those two peaks, the peak of the water temperatures and where the wind shear bottoms out. So one of the things that we look at to determine whether we might have more wind shear in the tropical Atlantic is actually water temperatures in the Pacific. So we'll take a look at that. So I got two rectangles here. The one in the Atlantic, fairly straightforward. It actually shows water that's a little bit cooler than average, but this was for today. This was a map that I grabbed this morning. So water temperatures in the Atlantic in the subtropics are a little warmer than average, but right in just off the coast of Africa, you can see that the waters are a little bit colder than average. However, if you look in the Pacific, we see that water temperatures are slightly above normal. So slightly warmer than average for this time of year. But we expect those water temperatures to continue to increase over the next few weeks and months, so that by the time we reach hurricane season, we will have much warmer water than average compared to average in the Pacific. One of the reasons that we know that is that there is a patch of very warm water at just below the surface, and we know that that water is migrating upwards. So we do expect that when we start to look at this map later in the hurricane season, there's going to be a lot more yellows and oranges in that rectangle in the Pacific than there is right now. If we look at the modeling for that, all the models are consistent with that. Anything in the orange or yellow, depending on how it looks on your screen, for those who are following the live stream, anything in that range is what we call a neutral condition. So the 0.5 is 0.5 degrees Celsius above average, and minus 0.5 is 0.5 degrees below average. And that's the water temperature in that rectangle in the Pacific. So anything above 0.5 is what we call an El Nino. That means that the water is warmer in that part of the Pacific. So all the models that, pretty much all the models that we're looking at would indicate that we will be in an El Nino condition by the time we reach the peak of hurricane season, which is August, September, and October. Looking at this from a probabilistic sense, we have about a 78% chance that we're going to be in that El Nino condition. When we have that warmer water in the Pacific, we tend to have more wind shear in the tropical Atlantic. That tends to keep the number of storms a little lower than it would otherwise if we did not have that condition in the Pacific. So only about a 1% chance that we're going to see the opposite of that, which would be a La Nina, and about a 21% probability that we're going to be in that neutral area. So pretty high probability that we're going to see an El Nino once we get into the peak of hurricane season. Question remains is how strong is it going to be? Now, if we look at water temperature in the Atlantic, now that would indicate a more active season, because the water temperature from our climate model is showing above average water temperatures in the Atlantic despite that colder patch that we're seeing today. So that's going to be another thing that we're going to be watching as the season progresses. So putting it all together, we have another factor called the multi-decadal oscillation. That's essentially a period of about 20 to 40 years where we go from an active period to a less active period. Right now we're in an active period, and there are no real strong signs that we're kind of getting out of that active period. So that would indicate maybe a few more storms than the long-term average. If we look at wind shear would indicate that we might have a lower number of storms. But then if we look at water temperature, that would indicate that there is a potential for things to be a bit more active than average. Now, so if we look at some of the outlooks that are already out there, there'll be a series of agencies and companies that issue outlooks here over the next few weeks. Tropical storm risk, they're a group from Europe. They are calling for 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes and 4 major hurricanes. So the number of storms is right on the average, which is 14.2. Colorado State, they're issuing their outlook, I believe it's April 9th. AccuWeather, again, a private company, they just recently issued their outlook and are calling for 11 to 16 named storms, 4 to 7 hurricanes, and 2 to 4 major hurricanes. The folks that run the European model, their outlook goes to the end of September, and for that period, they're calling for things to be fairly average, again, just in terms of the number of storms. And NOAA, of course, they issue their outlook at the end of May. So that's kind of how things look right now. Again, there will be more of these outlooks being produced over the next few weeks, so we'll see how that shapes up. But one thing to keep in mind, and last season is a good example where we only had the 13 named storms, but 4 of them went through rapid intensification and big-time rapid intensification. Obviously, that's a big problem if this occurs close to the coast where landfall is potentially imminent. So all hurricane seasons are created somewhat different, and you never know what you're going to get, and the number of storms doesn't always tell you the whole story. Because we have had some notable storms during El Nino seasons. Going back 1965, Betsy was one of them that created devastating conditions here in Florida and along the Gulf Coast. Camille, pretty much everybody probably remembers Camille, either from their own experience or seeing documentations on it. Hurricane Bob, obviously my friends from New England will remember Hurricane Bob in 1991. 2002 was another El Nino year. We had a landfalling hurricane in Canada that year. We also had a major hurricane in the Gulf that just weekend, just prior to making landfall in Louisiana. Of course, 2004, there were multiple storms that year. Charlie and Jean being the 2 memorable storms for here. And then, of course, Michael, again, another El Nino year, which was a landfalling Category 5. So you can't always go by the fact that we're going to have an El Nino to say that we're off the hook. So this is just another reminder of that. So the names for the storms for this year, we're going to start with Arthur, Bertha, and Cristobal, and so on. So based on some of the early outlooks, doesn't look like we'll have to make reference to the list of supplemental names, but if we do, this is going to be the list of supplemental names that we use. Again, this list does not change from year to year. However, this list does, and that's the list that we're going to be using in 2026. So the last thing I want to mention here is just acknowledge Dr. Neil Frank for people in meteorology of my generation. People remember Dr. Neil Frank for one storm, and that was Hurricane Gloria. Dr. Frank was the director of the National Hurricane Center for several years, from the early to mid-70s all the way to, I believe, 1987. And leading up to 1985, when Hurricane Gloria came up the coast, it had been a fairly quiet stretch for hurricanes. And lo and behold, now we have a major hurricane approaching, which was Gloria, approaching the densely populated east coast of the US into Canada. We did not have a Canadian Hurricane Center at the time, so we relied heavily on the forecast coming from NHC, and Dr. Frank was, just his way of presenting the information on all his media hits was something that was quite captivating, And to this day, I keep meeting people who got into meteorology because of Dr. Neil Frank. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Frank back in 2017 at this conference that was at that year being held in New Orleans. And Julio actually took this picture. I don't know if you remember that. So I'm really happy that I got the opportunity to meet Dr. Frank, who unfortunately passed away on Christmas Eve just last year. So I just wanted to put in a little, because Dr. Frank, I'm sure Julio is going to mention his involvement in, because he was the director when you established WX4NHC, am I correct? So hopefully we'll get a few stories about Dr. Frank from Julio. So with that, I will wrap it up, and I'll just, Rob mentioned Bobby Graves. When Bobby gives, when he gives his presentation, one of the things that he'll keep repeating was, or is never let your guard down. And hopefully we get to see it in the video when Rob plays the video, but this is the kind of year where it's easy to let your guard down. The forecasts are going to be coming out over the next few weeks. Some of them might say, well, it's going to be an El Nino year, so it won't be an active year. This is the year that you don't let your guard down, because these are the years where it can be very tricky, and we can get one storm or two storms that are very, very impactful when people thought it wasn't going to be an active year. So with that, I will say thank you for your reports, all the work that you do in providing us with the information. As a meteorologist who receives this information and uses it in our briefings, in our forecasts, I gotta say we're very appreciative of all the work that you put in to get us that information, and keep it coming. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Rob.
All right, thank you, Bob. It was a fantastic presentation, and we'll move on into the agenda here. As I said, we'll save questions for Bob at the end, because he'll be here for the entire workshop with us. With that, we're going to move on now. We are happy and pleased to have Brad Reinhardt, who I understand is recently promoted Senior Hurricane Specialist. So we're happy for Brad that he's been promoted, and he's going to talk a bit about amateur radio collaboration during hurricane events at the Hurricane Center. Thank you, Brad. And this should advance the PowerPoint.
Perfect. Thanks, Rob. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be here with you. So my name is Brad Reinhardt. I'm a Senior Hurricane Specialist at NHC. I've been in the National Weather Service now for almost 16 years. This will be my 7th hurricane season at the Hurricane Center in Miami. And so I'm excited to talk with you today about amateur radio collaboration, give you a little look behind the scenes of kind of how we do our job. I work in what's called the Hurricane Specialist Unit of NHC. We're a relatively small group of about 10 forecasters that staff 24/7 operations during the hurricane season with responsibilities in both the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. So we actually start May 15th and go through November 30th. And our small unit of 10 or so forecasters covers tropical operations throughout that period, issuing analyses and forecasts for tropical cyclones in the North Atlantic and the Eastern North Pacific basins, and issuing coastal tropical cyclone watches and warnings for the United States and its Caribbean territories, and also through the World Meteorological Organization. We have responsibility to provide watch and warning recommendations for various international countries throughout the Caribbean. We are in close contact with Bob and our colleagues at the Canadian Hurricane Center. We always enjoy meeting up with them. So it's a very dynamic and interesting job, and so I hope this presentation will kind of show you how you add value and help us as we're doing our job of making forecasts for hurricanes. I wanted to just go briefly over, the data sources that we have available to us, and all of these are not available to us in real time, or like we don't always have all of these available for every storm, and so it can be challenging. We have continuous coverage of storms with geostationary satellite imagery, so that gives us pictures from space of the storm, obviously very helpful. But then you go down the list, and some of these other data sets are only available at specific times. Things like radar data or surface observations. That's only going to be when something's either impacting land or very close to land, where we'll have those available to us. There's also things like buoy and ship observations. And then if we have the resources, working with our partners at the NOAA Hurricane Hunters, as well as the Air Force Hurricane Hunters, we can send airplanes into the storm and collect aircraft data at flight level, and also use things called drop-ons, which are just instrumentation packages that are dropped from the plane, fall down through the atmosphere, kind of the reverse of a weather balloon, but giving us information on temperature, winds, things like that as they fall down. So those are the kind of data sources that we're using as we're making the forecast. I wanted to go over a little bit of the operational challenges that we face, because when there is an active hurricane and we're issuing forecasts, we're working on a 3-hour advisory cycle. So from the time of the synoptic hour, which is 0, 6, 12, or 18 Zulu, or Universal Coordinated Time, we have about 3 hours from when that synoptic hour starts to when we have to get that forecast out the door, including all of the watch warning information, hazard information, key messages, things like that. And so as we kind of covered here, the fact is observational data coverage is limited, particularly internationally, but even, when storms are approaching the US, we may not always have a lot of data available to us. And we also know that during extreme weather events, communication becomes very difficult. As hurricane specialists, we're really processing a lot of information during the forecast cycle, as I kind of talked about there. And with the operational time constraints that we're up against, it can really make it challenging for us to seek out and find observations in real time. When we're on shift, we typically have 2 hurricane specialists on shift at all times, which is fine if there's one storm. Maybe I'm writing the forecast and maybe one of my colleagues is helping to collect data and things like that. But more often than not, we might have 2 or 3 or 4 storms at a time. And so everyone's got their hands full, and it can be difficult sometimes. And so that's where the observations and the damage reports that you relay to us are very helpful. And I wanted to give some examples of how we use that information and kind of point out how important it is to us. So in real time, we do receive the reports that come through the amateur radio group via email, and we may include them in the discussion and outlook section of our public advisory. I'm going to show a few examples in subsequent slides, but I pulled this out of our shift log from a few years ago. So this wasn't something publicly released, but just passed along internally from one forecaster to another, that the ham radio reports that were emailed to us were very useful, as in this case, this was Hurricane Larry that was approaching Newfoundland. So, that was up in Bob's neck of the woods, but it was really good to have, that information in areas that maybe traditionally we don't get, a lot of data from during hurricane landfalls. And that's just an example of our operational email account in the inbox, where every time there's a weather report that's submitted, we do get a notification of that, and we're able to monitor it in real time on the ops floor. And so to just give some real examples over the past 5 to 10 years of cases where this data has been referenced and used, I'll go back to Hurricane Maria in 2017, and you can see there I've kind of highlighted in yellow. It might be a little hard to see here in the room, but it's at the bottom part of that block of text that we noted ham radio reports indicate significant damage to structures that has occurred in Dominica as a result of Maria's passage. A couple years later, Hurricane Dorian had ham radio reports of extreme wind gusts up to 100 miles per hour in Hopetown in the Abacos. Hurricane Larry, which I just talked about a little bit on the previous slide, but we received reports through amateur radio of extreme winds, sustained winds of 84 miles per hour, gusts to 97 from a site, Cape St. Mary's in Newfoundland. And then Hurricane Ian in 2022, we got some information from amateur radio operators from an automated weather station as Ian approached Cuba. And so you can see a lot of these are international examples, and that's where we really struggle sometimes to get information in real time. And it's very helpful, because if we're making a forecast, you have to know what's going on now in order to make a good prediction for the future. So that's where this observational data becomes very valuable. And then the other piece to the puzzle is the post-analysis that we do at the National Hurricane Center. So at the end of every hurricane season, myself and my colleagues were divvied up all of the storms that occurred in a given year, and it's our job to record the history and impacts of every storm that occurred. And that's documented in our tropical cyclone reports, which are all publicly available on our website. those can vary. Some, for storms that are open ocean, didn't really have any significant land impacts, we can maybe turn those around in a few weeks. But for the bigger storms, like we talked about Hurricane Melissa, right, in the previous presentation, that was a report of very heavy lift that took several months. So this can be a very labor-intensive process. And your submissions help us during this process to document the surface observations and to capture significant impacts that the storm may have caused. I put up here as an example, this is a report I did actually with my wife a couple years ago. She's also a meteorologist with the Weather Service on Hurricane Otis back in 2023. Now, for those who may not remember, Otis was a Category 5 that made landfall in Acapulco, Mexico. It was extremely devastating to that area. And we spent a lot of time struggling to get documented information about what happened near the landfall site. And I distinctly remember going back to the list of emails that we had received of reports relayed through our amateur radio operators to help fully capture the magnitude of Otis's impact. So that was very helpful. And I pulled out this example from, this is a few years further back in time, the 2020 season. I actually started as a hurricane specialist in the 2020 season. Everybody remembers that was a particularly active one. So that was quite a welcome to the unit. Very busy hurricane season. And, just when you thought things were kind of wrapping, in November of that year, we had major hurricanes Eta and Iota that struck the coast of Nicaragua, almost the same exact location, roughly 2 weeks apart. I mean, just really unprecedented stuff. Can't imagine, the devastation that caused. And we were noticing that the report author in that case, Stacy Stewart, who's since retired, but he noted, that there was a lack of land-based wind reports from Iota due to the prior destruction that had been caused by Eta. And so it became very difficult to assess what happened, to document, for the historical record, what occurred in Nicaragua as a result of Iota. And I pulled out a couple of interesting statements that I think this group would really appreciate here. This is directly out of Stacy Stewart's report for Hurricane Iota. He noted that some extreme wind gusts that were relayed by the amateur radio group in Nicaragua. And then they also reported some damage information about, many homes incurring roof damage, significant damage to a makeshift hospital, things like that. And so this was, in some cases, some of the only information that we had about what actually happened on the ground. And it was relayed through Julio and his team at NHC from this amateur radio group in Nicaragua. And so very valuable, information. And so I just wanted to, again, show you that, what you do is really appreciated by all of us and helps us to do our jobs effectively. So thanks again for inviting me here. I hope you found this informative. And I'll be available through the first break so I can answer any questions at the end. Thanks, everyone.
Brad, thanks very much. And it was really interesting to see some of the reports because some of them came from our VoIP Hurricane Net on our side. So it's really beneficial and a good self-satisfaction for volunteers within our net to see that. So appreciate so much the presentation. So now what we'll do is we will move on to a key core contributor, founder of WX4NHC, the amateur radio station at the National Hurricane Center. And what we've kind of rebranded, and Bobby, who was here, would be pushing it, but he is not here, so I'll push it in his stead. Hurricane hams, as we kind of been calling ourselves more and more over the last few years. Those that are dedicated to hurricane, particularly the response and surface reporting phase, but also even helping out in the recovery phase. And Julio has a tremendous, distinguished record of public service, and there will be much to say about that, even in my presentation as we move on later in the program. Julio's going to talk about the operation at the National Hurricane Center, and I'm looking forward to, even though I've heard his presentation many times, including trips to New England where he has given it to our hams in our community up in New England, it's always good to hear it again because we always learn something new. So with that, let's turn it over to Julio Ripoll-WD4R.
All righty, thank you and welcome everybody, and I really appreciate everyone making the effort to be here in person. That That's really something special. And my name's Julio Ripoll. My call sign is WD4R, and I'm the co-founder and was the head coordinator, now assistant coordinator, and volunteer at WX4NHC at the National Hurricane Center, and now going on 46 years. And what we do there is we take reports from other ham radio operators that are being affected by hurricanes and relay them to the hurricane specialist. But before I go into the history and the technical part of my presentation, I just want to give you a little hurricane advice from my very many hurricane experiences. So if you're in a hurricane-prone area, make sure that you have a hurricane plan and a young helper to help you put up the shutters. Make sure you have backup communications and all the supplies that you need. Especially in Miami, toilet paper goes out in one day. And be prepared for the worst. You never know. And always have some really good food that doesn't require refrigeration. And when the local authorities give you evacuation notices, make sure you follow them very carefully. Anyway, enough of that. Here's a little bit of the history of who we are and what we do. And in 1980, Dr. Neil Frank, God rest in peace, Dr. Frank, and I really love him, and he got the idea that he wanted to have a ham radio station inside the Hurricane Center because every time they had a hurricane, especially through the Caribbean, they lost all communications and nothing was left. We couldn't talk to them, they couldn't talk to us. So he went to the University of Miami and asked for a ham radio operator, and I happened to be the president of the ham radio club at the University of Miami at that time. And I lived in the dormitory with my wife, Susan. We were just recently married. I was 24. And I lived one block from the Hurricane Center. So I met all the requirements. So he says, "You're it." And I said, "Well, how long do I have to be here?" He says, "Oh, probably a year or two." It's been 46 now. And this was our first radio station. I would carry the radio equipment and a wire antenna in a cardboard box from my dormitory, put it on the senior hurricane forecaster's desk. He was not too happy about that. And from there, we would talk to the Caribbean. And later on, we got very sophisticated, and we had the idea of having a ham radio station in an aluminum box that we could carry out of the Hurricane Center if we needed to in an emergency. And you can see it here and all the wires running all over the place. And you can see Dr. Frank there and his expression on his face is, what the heck is all this stuff? Well, our ham radio go kit never went anywhere because it weighed over 200 pounds. So here we are. This is called basically, I think they used to call it baptism by fire. The first hurricane we had in 1980 was Hurricane Allen, which was a Category 5 hurricane hitting the island of St. Lucia. It flattened the island, and we had one ham radio in St. Lucia talking to us through the whole thing, and he says they have a lot of injured people and they need medical help. And by coincidence, the British hospital ship, the HMS Glasgow, was nearby. They said, "We're in one-day sail, but we need governmental permission to land on the island." In 10 minutes, literally, he had the Prime Minister of St. Lucia on ham radio giving permission to the British hospital ship to land on the island, and they did. So then a week later, the same Hurricane Allen went throughout the southern Caribbean Ocean in the Gulf and hit, well, this is a picture of some of the damage done in St. Lucia. You can see the house completely upside down there. And it went through south of Cuba, and then it hit Brownsville, Texas. And we had an NWS office right there in Brownsville, and we were talking to them the whole time. But then all of their conventional communications went out. They had nothing left except one of their staff members was a ham. And he took his battery from his car and rigged up the ham radio. And from there, Dr. Neil Frank talked directly to them throughout landfall. And that cemented ham radio at the National Hurricane Center. So here we are in 1980. Sorry for the black and white pictures. I didn't have color back then. But we were located in a high-rise building in Miami on A1A on the 6th floor. And you can tell where we were because it's the only floor that had hurricane shutters. The rest of them didn't. So don't ask me about Hurricane Andrew. I'll tell you about that later, what happened. But in 1992, of course, Hurricane Andrew came by, gust over 200 miles per hour, and the building shook. The water came through from the roof down, and some of the windows above us broke, and it was really a bad situation. And you can see we're right basically just a little north of the eye of Andrew. And this was the first hurricane in the 1992 season, which was not an active season, but like they said, it only takes one. And this one changed a lot of lives. Hurricane Andrew severely damaged 300,000 homes and businesses in the South Florida area, including my house. I lost half the roof of my house. And I clearly remember the extremely loud noise, the rain hitting the windows like a shotgun. And I remember in my house, all the drywall ceilings came down, water came down, the insulation came down, the AC ducts came through. Anyway, I would say a good majority of the homes were damaged, and a lot of them because of the lack of supplies and contractors. I stayed out of my house for almost 6 months. And my wife, who's sitting way back there over there, had to move in with her mother because it was unlivable. But after that, we had over 200 hams from all over the country volunteer to come down to South Florida and provide backup communications between the local authorities, police and fire, and the military and Coast Guard and all that, because back then they didn't share the same frequencies on their radio communication, so they couldn't talk to each other. So then all the hams created that link, and that really worked well. And it worked so well that the governor of Florida actually sent me a letter, and that's one of the things I have framed on my wall, thanking not just me, but all the ham radio operators that helped throughout this disaster. And this was the actual radar picture from the Hurricane Center, and you can see how massive and how tight the eye of Hurricane Andrew was. And you can see WD4R house was right there in the path. Turkey Point nuclear plant was in the center, Hurricane Center, which is a little bit north. And the damage was extensive everywhere, including the nuclear plant. And right after it went through the nuclear plant, I'm an architect, and I worked for an architect who did a lot of work for Florida Power and Light. And I got assigned to Turkey Point nuclear plant to find out why the damage was so severe. And I can't tell you the details because I swore to an oath with the federal government that I wouldn't give you details. But we had things that were just unimaginable happening over there. And when I drove up there, after they cleared all the royal palm trees that had blocked the road, everybody's blocked in. And I'll never forget the weirdest scene when I drove into the parking lot, and half the poles had fallen facing south, the other half fall facing north. What happened was when the eye came over, the weak ones fell first. When the back of the eye came over, the other half fell. And this is just one example. This is actually a 2x6 that went through a royal palm tree, okay? And the nuclear plant had measured No, all the equipment, 100% of it was donated by all the commercial companies, especially Yaesu, that donated the majority of the equipment there. And we have radio equipment that is traditional, that does HF, which basically we send signals into the atmosphere, the upper layer called the ionosphere, then reflects it back to Earth, like if you shine a flashlight into a mirror, and it reflects it back thousands of miles away. No wires between us and them that can get damaged and stop communications. It's something that, even though it's 100 years old, it still works. Then we also have modern radio equipment, which are radios that are also connected to digital systems that go through the internet, and it's a combination of radios. So a guy with a little walkie-talkie with 5 watts talks to a repeater that's connected to the internet, that's connected to another repeater that comes out 1,000 miles away. So we get a lot of information from what we call the VoIP, Voice over Internet Protocol radio system, from other stations that use the same type of technology. And sometimes when the propagation from the atmosphere doesn't cooperate with us, and we can't hear the person in Puerto Rico, but we can hear the guy in Japan, you see what I mean? It skips over us. They fill in the gaps. And they also do extra work because they also go through social media like Facebook and X, Twitter, and all that. They gather that information and they email it to us. And these are our operators. We have close to 30 operators. They have federal background checks. They're personally trained at the Hurricane Center, and they know how to handle the equipment, the reports, and how to present it to the hurricane specialist. And during the pandemic, we learned something new, how to work remote. You think we would know that already. 99% of our operators have a home radio station and antenna. And during the pandemic for COVID, we couldn't come in person. So we developed this system, and we were worried it wouldn't work, but it did work because the Hurricane Center gave us a secret email address. So we collected all the reports in, then two of us would review them for accuracy and completeness, and then when we thought they were good reports, we'd email them to the secret email address, which then the hurricane specialist received it at the hurricane desk. So instead of 1,000 reports, they may get a couple dozen reports, but those were pretty accurate. So that's how we worked it out. So then going quickly to our purpose and goals, collect weather data, surface reports, which are very important to fill in the gaps for the hurricane forecasters. And then we would provide emergency backup communications from the Hurricane Center to other NWS stations and EOCs, Emergency Operations Centers, and even the governor, and a couple times even the White House. Believe it or not, sometimes they pay attention and they contact us and say, is this what really happened? And then provide hurricane advisories over ham radio for sources that were not available in the affected area. And just one example, we had a hurricane coming through the Yucatan in a sparsely populated area, and there was a ham operator there in this little fishing village. And he says, can you give me the coordinates of the hurricane and the speed and line? We gave him all the data, and he was transmitting that data. He was relaying it to the only AM radio station in that area. And that population, that was the only way they can get that information. And then we found out that after the hurricane was going through, because of the way of the waves and the flow, all the water from that bay had receded several hundred yards. And the bottom of that bay, you can go and collect clams and crabs. And a lot of the village people went out there to do that. And as soon as Max Mayfield heard that, he says, we got to send a special notice to the government down there, because when the hurricane passes through, the water doesn't come in slowly. It comes in as a tidal wave, and it'll just kill a bunch of people. And they paid attention. So that really helped. And then the last thing that we do is we enhance and promote the accuracy and availability of weather service reports. In other words, we promote people having their own weather stations, even if they're not, the top of the line or whatever, but something is better than nothing. And our basic goal is to help save lives. And as we said, we have a whole bunch of specialty ham operators there, and this is up in the roof. We have a catwalk where we have all our antennas connected to it. And sometimes, depending on the hurricane, we have up to 4 or 5 ham radio operators operating at a single time, all different types of radios, different frequencies, from HF to UHF to VHF to digital. And that's how we collect everything together. And this was the first time we did remote operations during the COVID pandemic. And you can see these are some of our operators operating from the home stations. And most of them were here in Miami. The 2 on the bottom right were in St. Croix. The one on the upper left was in Maryland. So the fact that they weren't physically in Miami with us didn't matter. We can communicate with each other and relay the stations that we couldn't hear and all that, and it worked perfectly. So how can ham radio help during hurricane seasons? Here's a flow chart. You can see that we have a lot of sources of information that come in. We collect it, we put it in a specific format, because sometimes they come in as just a story, and then we relay those to the Hurricane Center specialist, and then sometimes to the EOCs or the Red Cross or FEMA. We have the FEMA office is right next door to our radio room, and this was very important during Hurricane Katrina. This is on our website, a set of different frequencies that we monitor. We can't be everywhere at one time, so we do have specific frequencies, and those frequencies are usually radio nets. And radio nets, and you'll hear some about it in a minute, they're a group of hams that are spread out through the entire country that relay information to us. So we can't go to them at 1,000 different frequencies, but they know where we are. And the Hurricane Watch Net, you'll see a little video. Unfortunately, the net manager, Bobby Graves, had an emergency medical issue, and he was ready to come here, and the day before, he couldn't make it, so he sent a video. So we appreciate that. They've been with us since day one. And Rob will tell you more about the VoIP Net, which we also call Echo Link, and it's basically the combination of using radio and internet to bring that all together. And you can see you can operate that and communicate, all the way up from Nova Scotia on a handheld to a repeater that's connected to the internet, that's connected to us, and we still get all the information. And then this week we came up with, about 20, 30 years ago, which is the CWOP, Citizens Weather Observers Program, which uses a thing called APRS, which is Automatic Positioning Radio System. So they get weather stations, they get a little adapter that then takes that data and beacons it every 30 seconds, every minute or so, and you can see that it's all over the place, and we get their data automatically from all those stations. So we're trying to make sure that we get as much data as possible. Now here's some examples, and by the way, for you that are not hams, don't do this. Because we had people going out there, wait just a minute, I'll get you a wind report. And the winds are over 100 miles an hour. I said, don't do that. Anyway, we have an online forum. So if you're a weather enthusiast, then you can directly input your data in there. Then we have a paper form. This is our first, well, not our first, but one of the paper forms we developed to have a specific format, and it can be used as a checklist for our amateur radio operators and our amateur weather people to use as a checklist. Send a report. It's not just wind speed. Make sure you have wind direction, those kind of things. And these are other things like D-Star and technical reports. And WindLink was one of the prime reasons that we have still a digital system there. WindLink is a radio system that uses a special device that will convert not just data like an email. When we get it on our end, it looks like an email, and it can have pictures attached to it, even some short videos. And they're sent over the ionosphere, and then they get reconverted back into digital, and then we get it through our computer. And that has been very helpful. And in fact, we had a sailboat. This is Hurricane Adrian back in 1915 2005, excuse me, not 1950, 2005, sorry. And there was a sailboat there, and it kept relaying information about barometric pressure and the wind speed and all that, and the wind direction. And they actually corrected the tracking map to land on a different country, believe it or not, in Central America. And here's just a few reports. This is the 2025 last hurricane season there. You can see most of the hurricanes remained what we call fish storms, except for one, which was Hurricane Melissa, which became one of the historic hurricanes to hit Jamaica, and it destroyed that western half of the island. And you can see the before and after pictures there of the area called Black River, which is just south of Montego Bay. And I have friends that live in that area. And this destruction is incredible. You can see the church there completely blown away. And we were talking live to one of our Jamaican friends near Black River, right in between Black River and Montego Bay. And he was giving us the wind reports, and he had gusts going up to 192 miles per hour. And the thing is, in the background, I could hear his wife screaming. She's looking out the window. She says, the trees are falling, the trees are falling. And then he went off the air. I haven't heard back from them. So now going through another one about how ham radio made a difference, Hurricane George. And it had just come off of the coast of Haiti at night. The eye had clouded over, Cuba would not let us fly any reconnaissance planes over their airspace, so they didn't have any data for quite a while. And then Max Mayfield came in the radio room and he said, "Get me a Cuban radio station on the eastern point of Cuba." I'm like, they don't have a phone number. I can't call them. So I actually got special permission to get on a special frequency, which was this Cuban Civil Defense frequency. I got in there, and as soon as I said Hurricane Center, boom, they came right back. And I said, I need some information here to improve our forecasts, which we share with them. They got a station at Punto Este, which is the most eastern point of Cuba. And that ham operator started screaming in the microphone. He says, "I'm standing on my chair because I have water in my house, and I can't want to stand on top of the water while I hold the microphone." And he was screaming in the air, the wind speed on that, and Lexion Avila, which is the only Cuban hurricane specialist we had over there at the time, got on there. He says, "I don't care, give me the wind direction." And the guy, the last three words he said, the last three transmission was del sur, from the south. And Max and Lexion ran out of the radio room and like, what the heck just happened? Well, that night at 11 o'clock news, I go up there and here's Max Mayfield sitting there with my handwritten report in his hand. I'm going like, oh boy, am I in trouble? Well, he said it actually changed the forecast track, and instead of having the hurricane still curving down, towards the southern part of Cuba, which is Guantanamo Bay, where we have a military base, it actually started going further north. And if you can see the track, it actually went through the north coast of Cuba and then into the Gulf. So that made a big difference. And real quickly, here's Michelle 2001, and something similar happened here. And this is the Isle of Youth was underwater, and they asked me, says, "Can you get reports from Cuba?" And I said, "Well, I can't guarantee they'll be able to answer us." And this young man from Cuba came on the air, and he apparently had access, or he was working for the military, and started giving us radar points for the eye as it crossed over, which was like unheard of. And then after that, the hurricane crossed over Cuba, and the Bahamian Islands were letting down the hurricane warnings because the eye had clouded over and it looked like it was falling apart. And there was a sailboat giving us reports of over 100 miles per hour winds. That's the sailboat there and the captain, and he talked directly to the hurricane specialist. And Max Mayfield was still there at the time, and he called the Met Office at the Bahamas to raise the hurricane warnings up again. And he explained that even though you don't see the eye, the mass of the wind keeps rotating underneath those clouds. And that alone could have saved a bunch of lives. And of course, Katrina, and you can see what Katrina did. It was one of the deadliest hurricanes since the 1928 hurricane, Florida Okeechobee, and Katrina killed 1,833 people, most of it from the flooding that they had. And we have a lot of stories to tell about the communications there, but we were one of the first to find out that the Superdome was losing part of the roof through a ham radio operator that was there. And that was something that, we won't forget, but it caused such a situation. It was the busiest time that I have seen at the Hurricane Center when all that was going off, and we then had the NWS office. If you know the Hurricane Center, there's three agencies in there. We have the Hurricane Center, National Hurricane Center, then the Tropical Prediction Center, which is mainly marine weather, and then we have the NWS, mainly for local weather, but they coordinate with the other NWS stations all over the country. And the head of the NWS came into our radio room and says, "We've lost all comms with Slidell, Louisiana, which is where Ground Zero was going to be. Can you get them on the air?" I said, "Well, if they have a ham." Well, they did. So we stayed with them for 6 hours during landfall. And you can see some of the reports that we handwritten there. and they were talking to us continuously. And also, after landfall, they had 41 staff members in there, and they couldn't talk to their families after that. So then we were relaying reports from the ham radio to their families that they were okay. So you can see all the different things that ham radio can do during a hurricane. And these are just a few of the hams that were there live during Hurricane Katrina. And the bottom right is Dr. Jim Hirschman, who was the head cardiologist for Mercy Hospital, and he was a ham. And he was the one that was talking live to them when they were giving them those reports. He also won the Barry Goldwater Award, which is a national award for ham radio. So is ham radio too old? We had a famous reporter, I won't tell you who he is, came into the Hurricane Center, and he watched me talking to a ham that was being affected by a hurricane. And he says, "What are you using there?" He says, "That's 100-year-old stuff. You guys are a bunch of dinosaurs." So I told him, I said, "Okay, next time you're in Bermuda and a Category 5 hurricane's coming over you, go out there with your satellite phone and give me a call." So he says, "No, I guess you're right." And then the Weather Channel, which is Dr. Rignab is there now. He was one of our past directors. And Mike Bettis came up with a cliche, which I'll never forget. He says, "You might be a dinosaur, but you're not yet extinct." So this is why we volunteer. And it just touches my heart when I see some of these people and what they suffer through. And it doesn't matter who they are or where they are. We all suffer the same, and we all care about each other the same. And just real quick, this is not a hurricane, but a disaster. Back in 2010, we had a major hurricane, a major earthquake hit Haiti. And I'm an architect for the University of Miami, and I work at the medical school. And the head of the medical school and the dean called me and says, we sent 140 doctors and medical staff. We built the largest peacetime field hospital down there, and we can't talk to them. All 40 satellite phones could not get a dial tone. They sent 2 VSAT systems, could not use them either. They were dead. So then in one day, we put together a team, including with our national headquarters, the ARRL up in Connecticut, who I called them and I said, "Listen, we need your help. We need volunteer operators to get vaccinated against malaria and other things, fly down there in private donated planes to Haiti and stay there 2 operators at a time for a week at a time until we get this situation under control." So we did that. So in 2 days, we built a station at the hospital at the University of Miami, and then a radio station in Port-au-Prince where the field hospital was, and coordinated not just the internal communications there, but the communications to the U.S. Comfort ship, which is a hospital ship that was 2 miles offshore. We coordinated the helicopter pickups and drop-offs of critical patients and the speedboats, and then the helicopter drop-offs through area hospitals of supplies. We even coordinated the supply chain orders from the doctors when they needed more supplies, and for specialist doctors to talk to specialists in Miami when they had severe conditions of patients there. This is all against FCC rules. We're ham radio operators, amateurs. We can't do anything that is commercial or medical. And the ARRL then had the head legal counsel for the FCC in Washington, D.C. call me, and I explained her the situation. Laura Smith, she was fantastic. And within about an hour, she called me back. She says, "I have a message from the President of the United States. Do whatever it takes." So that's what we did. We put all the rules aside, and this is what we did. And this is through WinLink, where they send messages. We got daily situation reports, including pictures. And I'll read you what he said. He said, the trauma nurses came in and said, "There's a little girl who's going to turn 3 years old today, and we'd like you to help us celebrate her birthday. So we went to the communications shack, and then we went to the supply shack and found some donated toys. And we went into the tent to celebrate her birthday, and the lady with the pink shirt is the little girl's mother. And he said, this is what we do and why we do it. It is in our nature as human beings to help others in the time of need. So please use your unique skills to help other lives. So anyway, I started real young. I had a really nice black mustache when Dr. Neil Frank called me to duty. And of course, time went by really fast. I went through, I think it was over 10 hurricane directors there, and it's been 46 years. So I think I'm ready to retire. I was going to retire last year, and I'm retiring now slowly. But I want to thank all of you hams, but I am going to go ahead and retire in this year or last year. And I want to or next. But anyway, I want to introduce to you, well, before I introduce you to someone special, this is the director of the National Hurricane Center, and he basically gave us a real nice statement. It says, the NHC ham radio network has played a crucial role for more than 45 years, providing real-time information during tropical storms and hurricanes, and the information provided by ham radio was incredibly helpful to NHC's hurricane specialists, as it provides ground data during an event that offers valuable option to maintain communications to those situations where traditional communication methods have failed or become unavailable. And that's what we do, is transmit that signal through the atmosphere, the ionosphere. Anyway, I may have.
Hi, this is Mike Brennan coming to you here. Going on now for 45 years, all the way back to 1980. And if you think back to the 20.
Hi, this is Mike Brennan coming to you here from the home of our amateur radio station, WX4NHC, here at the National Hurricane Center. Just wanted to say a few words about how important this amateur radio effort and program is here at NHC. It's been going on now for 45 years, all the way back to 1980. And if you think back to the 2024 hurricane season and how impactful it was across the Atlantic Basin, with 10 hurricane landfalls, 5 of those happening in the United States, the amateur radio station here at NHC is really one of our vital links to communicate with affected areas. They can provide us with reports of damage, meteorological observations, and just enable communications between forecasters here at NHC and those in affected areas when there are no other ways to communicate, when power is out, when traditional communications have failed. So that amateur radio station and that presence here at NHC is really vital to make sure that we can get those critical key observations when they're in a timely fashion and get them to the forecasters so that they can help make those decisions. So just wanted to say those words as you all gather here at the National Hurricane Conference this week. And I particularly want to thank Julio. This is going to be his last year helping to run the station here at NHC. He's had 45 years of service that he's dedicated to this effort over the tenure of more than 10 Hurricane Center directors. So I just really want to thank him for his efforts and wish you a great week at the conference. Thanks.
November 4, Lima, Juliet, Kilo. He's been one of our volunteer operators for over 20 years. He's a retired battalion chief and paramedic for Lauderdale by the Sea Fire Rescue Department. And he's also a RACES officer and a Miami-Dade Fire Rescue and vice president of the Dade Radio Club, which is the largest ham radio club in Florida. Lloyd, can you come up? So I wanted to thank him personally for letting me retire.
He's not going anywhere. I'm no dummy.
All right, thank you, Lloyd. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Yes. Welcome aboard Deloitte, and we are so happy to have him in person and to meet him today. All right, so what we're going to do is we have the video for the Hurricane WatchNet. It's about 20 minutes, and then we will do our break. And then, like I said, if everyone could be back by 3:30 sharp. I know normally with breaks, everybody kind of wanders in. There's a special showing at 3:30 here that is not on the agenda that we will have. So if folks can come back for that, that will be great. So with that, we'll move on to the Hurricane WatchNet video, and we'll get that pulled up here in 1 second. It's just slightly over 20 minutes long, and then we will have a break.
Rejoining that back in 2012, and we can resume doing the website. And the following year, I was offered the chance to serve as manager. And it's been a pleasure to fill our roles ever since. It's been a pleasure to. The Hurricane WatchNet officially began on Labor Day weekend. The Hurricane WatchNet 1965. Labor Day weekend. This gentleman here, 1965. KB5HAV-Bobby Graves. Back in 1965, he was a very young man, only 28 years old, and he was stationed in Rhode Island while he was in the Navy. And in his off time, he loved to get on ham radio and do what he could. And he was stationed back then, that day, he was operating that called and in his off time, he loved to intercontinental amateur radio traffic. Back in those days, it operated on 14320. That day, and then it's still operating today on 14300. They're just starting to play the same amateur radio traffic. Back then, they used those days to operate traffic channels. You got to remember, that was back in the early stages of the Vietnam War, and they did a lot of full-patch traffic for our military where they were in the world. You got to remember that. So he was doing like everything they could come Labor Day weekend. They did a lot of. There was a lot of questions going on about this storm named Betsy trying to come to the Bahamas. So and it was so much of I don't want to say disruption to the bed, but he said to the traffic net is this is what people want to know. What's this storm Betsy we're talking about? We did not have the technology back then like we do now. And so, Jerry Jackson, that manager, you might have moved everybody into 14325, so it was interested in the storm. We did not have the technology. That's a great idea. So he moved up to 14325. It was a lady by the name of everybody up to 14325 that was interested in the storm. Manager thought that's a great idea, so he moved up to 14325. There was a lady by the name of Marcy, was located in the Panama area. She followed him up, and they started trying to do what they could to help those asking about Betsy. To help out, there was a gentleman in the Miami area. I wish I had his name. Anyway, he would get the latest bulletins relayed to Jerry, and they would relay that out to the people asking about the storm. Jerry got to thinking maybe the forecaster could use some weather data. Some of these folks are mariners, some are on the islands, the Bahamas. So he started gathering weather data and tried to get into the Hurricane Center. Well, back then, it's 1965, we didn't have a ham radio station there, so we had to somebody either call or send it in via fax. The Hurricane Center said, please, we don't have any information like this. Anything you give us, please do so. Just a little bit of history. I took some time during the winter months to see just how many storms have developed during the lifetime of the Hurricane WatchNet. Would you believe there have been a total of 777 named storms? Man, I'm gonna have to get my glasses on, I can't see this. But 385 of those became a hurricane, 150 of those became a major hurricane. We activated 170 times for 156 hurricanes. 60 of those were major hurricanes. There were some that they were forecast to become a hurricane. They just never did do so when they made landfall. And there's been a total of 26 Category 5 hurricanes since '65. 12 of those made landfall, and 3 of those, unfortunately, made landfall here in the United States. The last one being Michael back in 2018. Back in 2016, we set an all-time activation record for our net. We were in continuous operation around the clock for just over 6 days, and we amassed over 1,300 man-hours for Hurricane Matthew. That storm, if you remember, hit Haiti, eastern side of Cuba, then went across, came up the Florida coastline, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina before it turned out to sea. The mission of our net is to disseminate advisory information. Not only do we read the latest information, we also grab the weather information from those in the field. Now people must once again say, well, we got all this newer technology, why don't we use that instead of ground truth with data? Well, consider, you got the stationary satellites that give us fantastic information. Over the past almost 10 years, I guess now, we've had GO-16, gives great information, high definition video or high definition images. But you got to consider that satellite is in a stationary orbit about 200 plus miles above the surface, trying to give the forecasters an idea of what's going on at the surface. We have the hurricane hunters that fly into, around, and above the hurricanes, dropping drop signs and taking other kind of information, try to figure out what's going on at the surface. We got Doppler radar on the ground, scanning the skies, trying to figure out what's going on in the storm, but what's happening at the surface. Well, if we have people at the surface that's got a weather station, or at least a barometer, or can tell us which way the wind is blowing, I can promise you that forecaster, he wants that information. We also function as a backup communications link, not only for the hurricane centers, but the coastal area weather service field offices, emergency operations centers, storm shelters, non-governmental agencies, and sometimes even the military. And we try to be there before, during, and after a hurricane event. A lot of folks think, well, Bobby, you're not really being there after. So I've caught that word, and I've been trying to, over the past couple of years, for those major hurricanes that are hitting, we stay in operation once the storm has been downgraded to a tropical storm to not only grab post-storm information as far as damage reports, but also to help out with any outgoing health and welfare traffic. And over the past couple of seasons, there's been a lot of folks asking for it, and we're going to keep doing what we can. We also provide situational awareness to government and non-government agencies that request such, and also work closely with the Salvation Army SATERN network with outgoing health. We've had 27 landfalling hurricanes. Would have been more if there had been something in 2013. When this decade's over. We've got used and spoiled to the high definition satellite imageries we've been able to use over the past 20 years or so. But back in 1965, we didn't have any stationary satellites. We had one that just orbited the Earth, take a picture here every now and then. This is our inaugural storm, Hurricane Betsy. Can you tell me where it's located at? Forecasters knew where it was. We didn't get the first stationary satellite until 1975. That's when GOES-2 went. Problem is, everything went, by the time it displays on the screen for you, that information is at least 5 to sometimes 10 minutes old. A lot can happen in that amount of time. But back in '65, the radar we had was originally designed to spot aircraft back in World War II. It just did a better job of picking up weather. And that's a but also we have a chat room that we use to coordinate between our members and also the National Hurricane Center. All of us, we can talk to Julio or any of his members there when operating. Maybe times, hey, one of the forecasters say, hey, we need some more information. If Julio can't do it or one of the others, hey, we sometimes talk directly to the forecasters. It's rare, but it has happened. And back in 2017, we started using our own logging program to help us out in more ways than one. And of course, since 2000, we've also had a tropical weather email subscription you can sign up for. You can get one for the Atlantic, Eastern Pacific, and Central Pacific. It only is active during hurricane season. As soon as the tropical weather outlook is published or any active storm is going on, within just milliseconds of the forecaster hitting their send button on their keyboard, you'll have a copy of that report in your email inbox. Free service of the Hurricane Watch Net. Hurricane Center tried that for a few years. They shut it down in 2012, so I think right now we're still the only ones offering that free service there. What else has changed for the Hurricane Watch Net? Availability. As mentioned before, we were strictly, for many years, a 20-meter only net, but I changed that in 2013, making us a round-the-clock net. And as old saying goes, I just lost my train of thought. Anyway, we always have a need for hurricane preparedness as well as amateur radio operators. Our net activation policy is whenever a hurricane is within 300 miles of expected landfall. However, that could vary due to the forward speed and intensity of that storm. If it's moving real slow, say like 5 miles per hour, we may delay a little bit. But if it's say like moving at 15 miles per hour, and hey, this is a major hurricane, yeah, we'll be activating in that 300-mile area. It's just sort of a guideline for where we start at. And of course, our frequencies of operation, 14.325 by day, 7.268 by night. When required, we'll operate both frequencies at the same time. Our area of coverage is the entire Caribbean, Central America, Eastern Mexico, Eastern Canada, and the Eastern Gulf Coast states of the United States. And from time to time, we even activate for storms in the Eastern Pacific. From time to time, I get asked, well, where are y'all located at, Bobby? Well, unlike most organizations, that does have a central hub. To better serve our served agency, which being the National Hurricane Center, we're scattered about. We cover 6 countries and 22 U.S. states. The other countries are, besides the United States, is Canada, Bermuda, Honduras, Aruba, and Venezuela. And we do have a number of members who are fully bilingual. I'm still trying to add more bilingual operators to our membership to help out, because there are still a number of folks that check in with us. They're bilingual. They speak Spanish only, or they may be bilingual. They're just more comfortable speaking Spanish. So the more bilingual operators we have, the better. Prior to any net activation, we always try to alert as many of the daily users of 14.325 and 72.68. We also work the maritime networks of the Maritime Mobile Service Net, the Waterway Net, and that one in the top right called boatwatch.org. For many years it was known as International Boat Watch Net. That organization, using WindLink and other means, are able to reach literally hundreds of mariners in the Atlantic. Some are ham operators, some are commercial, but they can at least tune in and listen to what the latest information on the storm is. If they are ham operators, we do invite them to check in with us to give us their weather reports. I know the forecasters would love to get at least 3 hourly reports if possible. We also work closely with the Amateur Radio Relay League and the International Amateur Radio Union Region 2. Through their email networks, they're able to help us spread the word of our activations. We work very closely with U.S. Army and Air Force Mars, as well as Salvation Army SATERN Net. And when storms do affect the Canadian Maritimes, we contact their counterpart to the ARRL, which is Radio Amateurs of Canada, and their version of SKYWARN, which they call CanWarn. And also we have our presence on social media, which is on Facebook. As of last year, we're now on X, which is formerly known as Twitter. We do have a YouTube channel, and this year we're going, one way or another, I'm putting out some new information on there and see if we can't make that channel grow. We also contact numerous amateur radio news outlets, including Newsline and others. We always work very closely with the ham station of the Hurricane Center, WX4NHC, and also with our sister network, the VoIP Hurricane Net. If you haven't noticed, we're passionate about what we do. So you may ask, well, why are you so passionate? I can tell you one thing for the Hurricane Watch Net. Over the past 60 years, we've witnessed the power and destruction of Mother Nature, and we're here to do what we can to help in assisting to saving lives. We've seen the power of what storm surge can do. This is what Ivan did back in 2004 after it hit Gulf Shores, Alabama, and the storm surge going through Escambia Bay just leveled the I-10 bridge between Pensacola, Florida and Milton, Florida. We've seen what storm surge can do in New Jersey and New York, as what happened with Superstorm Sandy. We've seen the power of not only storm surge, but Category 5 winds such as Camille in '69, just leveling everything in sight. Same way with Andrew back in 1992, and Hurricane Michael back in 2018. And as we were reminded very strongly last year, hurricanes are not always a coastal event. Just because they made landfall doesn't mean it's over. Hurricane Camille back in '69 moved well inland into the state of Mississippi. When it got to Jackson, which is 150 miles inland, it's still a Category 1 hurricane. It eventually moved on up into Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Virginia, bringing well-needed rain to areas that were hit hard by a drought. But when it got to West Virginia and Virginia, the amount of rain it dropped, there was flooding there. Unfortunately, a lot of folks died in those floods. Hurricane Ivan, once again, just sort of picking on that one that I got many I could pick from out of 60 years of services. But Ivan was a strange one. After it made landfall in Gulf Shores, Alabama, over the next 3 days as it moved inland towards Pennsylvania, spawned up to 130 tornadoes before it finally got back out in the Atlantic, went south and crossed over the southern tip of Florida, and then eventually into southeast Texas. A lot of folks say, well, it's just a tropical storm, Bobby. It's just nothing but an over-glorified thunderstorm. Tell that to the people of Houston back in 2001. This is what Allison did when it stalled and dropped 40 inches of rain on the city. Left thousands homeless. It caused a lot of damage. 41 people died, and there was over, I can't see that number there. Yeah, $5.5 billion and 2001 of damage. During hurricane season, I always like to remind folks, please visit our website, hwn.org. Anytime there's an active storm, you'll find it at the top center of the page, whether it's in the Atlantic, Eastern Pacific, or Central Pacific. You also have the email subscriptions I was telling you about. We got a couple locations on the homepage. Of course, on any page on the left side navigation bar, we have links for that. Also, our presence on social media. We also have some downloads you can get, such as hurricane tracking maps, family emergency plan, emergency supply kits, and more. Basically, some of the information we have in your handouts will also have downloadable from our website. Anytime there is an active storm, we've got a page that's dedicated to those storms, and you can go into how much detail you want to learn about those. Most people would want to use public advisories. That's one you'll hear usually on TV. Another good one to get is the discussion. One thing I love about the discussion product, that's where the forecaster gets a chance to lay down his thinking, his overall mentality, of his reasoning for that public advisory being as it is. And at the bottom of that discussion product, he will put in, or she will put in, key messages, things that may be of great importance about that storm. And for those who like to keep up with the tracking of the storm, they put in forecast points going out to 120 hours. When it comes to our net activations, we need reporting stations. We need you. When we do activate, what do we need? Well, in addition to your name and location, let us know if your information is measured or estimated. While we always love measured data, we will definitely take estimated. Such information we need is wind speed, wind gust, wind direction. If you do have a personal weather station, let us know the height and location of that anemometer is very important. If you do have a barometer, let us know the last time it was calibrated. No matter, we can always use it as a baseline of tracking the trend going up and down. Rainfall, how much rain over X amount of time. If able to safely do so, storm surge, or any other type of damage. If you happen to have a friend close by, ham or not, if they have a personal weather station, and maybe you don't, call them up, ask them what the information is so they can forward that info to the Hurricane Center. Maybe they are a ham, and if you do lose phone lines or whatever, maybe you can have a schedule set up with them on UHF or VHF using a handheld or something. All that information goes a long ways. And if you don't know if you don't have a personal weather station and don't know how to judge wind speed, on any of our web pages, on the left side of the navigation bar, you'll find a link that's called Beaufort Wind Scale. Great scale is when you go down through it, it can help you get pretty doggone close in accuracy of what the wind speed is. How bad can the season be? Need I say, it only takes one landfalling hurricane. Case in point, Andrew. It's the only landfalling storm that year, but that's all it took. But we always thought it couldn't get no worse than 2005. And then Mother Nature said, let me show you something different, pal. We had 2020 come along and just outdid everything with 30 named storms. When it comes to tropical cyclones, please never let your guard down. As spoken earlier, you saw that cone, that air cone. Guess what? Them things can change a little bit. You always want to stay abreast of what the storm is doing because they can change direction. Hurricane Betsy did back in '65. It changed course twice. Another one back in 1985, a storm named Elena came across Cuba. Looked like it was coming straight on to Mississippi. Got right out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, made a right hook going towards Tampa, Florida. And then when it looked like it was going to make landfall, it said no. It did a 180-degree turn. Come back and hit Gulfport, Mississippi as a Category 3. Mother Nature loves to play with us. Bottom line, stay informed. The time to prepare is now. Never drop your guard. And in closing, after 60 years of service for the Hurricane Watch Net, I hope that the services we brought has been able to help you. I know the information we've been able to get is, I know the Hurricane Center is appreciated, but we're working here for you as well to help you stay abreast of what the storm is doing.
All right, that's our Hurricane WatchNet video. We have a break now till 3:30. Like I said, at 3:30 sharp, there is a special unscheduled presentation we hope folks will stick around for, and have a good break. Let me know when you're ready, Jim. Ready. All right, welcome back from our break here at the 2026 National Hurricane Conference Amateur Radio Workshop. Before we get into the rest of our agenda, we have a surprise special presentation. And here to start things off are members of the staff of the National Hurricane Center. And I guess I will be starting with Dan Brown from the National Hurricane Center. And we're honored and privileged to have all these folks here for this special presentation. Dan.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. I know there's a lot of folks online as well. We know that Julio, that has been doing this for a very long time, has said that he's going to hang it up after, I think, 45 years. And we wanted to express our gratitude for everything that you have done for us in helping get the hurricane word out and working with our staff to get those reports to us. Thank you. I look back at the history a little bit, and I think you started with Neil Frank back in, it was 1980 or 79? And I don't know, there's been 8 or 9 directors through the years that you've worked with. I saw some photos, 10. Yeah, so I saw some photos online with you all the way back to with Neil Frank and Max and Bob Sheets. So a long time there. Just a lot of dedication. I know it's a real passion of yours. We appreciate, I think, seeing you in the office when we have a storm. It's again, we know you're communicating and helping get the message out, but also getting those reports back to us. I'll turn it over to Mike, see if he wants to add any more, but we do want you to come up here in a second. We have something to present to you.
Thanks, Dan. And just to build on what Dan said, I mean, I think the success of what we've seen been developed and sustained at the Hurricane Center is really a shining example of the perseverance and effort that individuals put into these efforts and really becomes something bigger than any individual effort could become, and has become something that's sustaining and enduring. And the fact that something's around since 1980 and now we're in 2026 through busy years, quiet years, local threats, just about every type of scenario that the Hurricane Center has been through in its existence, Julio has been a part of. And it's a really, that level of dedication is very much appreciated, and it's paid dividends beyond what you can see and experience personally, but well beyond, because of the reach that this effort in this community has. So I just want to thank you for your dedicated efforts and for building something that will endure even after you step away. And that's a real testament to your efforts. So thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to read the plaque here. So it's presented to Julio Ripoll by the National Hurricane Center for more than 45 years of invaluable contributions developing and coordinating amateur radio communications to fill critical data gaps and provide essential eyewitness reports, significantly aiding NHC's mission. So, thank you. You've got to say a few words.
Well, I want to thank you, everyone at the Hurricane Center, because they have been welcoming since day one. And, sometimes we come in and work till 2 and 3 in the morning, and you didn't kick us out.
We're there too.
I'll never forget one time I came in and Max Mayfield looked up. He goes, "Julio's here. He's going to be a bad one." But it's been a unique experience, and the satisfaction is, watching all of you working to help people in a disaster, and not asking where they're from, who they are, and as we say in ham radio, we have no borders. We talk around the world, and you guys do the same thing. You help everybody, and we really appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Thank Yeah. Thanks, Julio. Really appreciate it. Again, thanks for all the dedication through the years. Thank you.
Another round of applause.
Yes.
Should Julio take a picture with the whole staff here?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Let's get a good spot.
I'm going to try something here.
We'll get you in the middle. Yeah.
You stole my spot, Brad.
If you give me 1 second here, I'm going to get this Julio's title slide up, if I can, and view. Perfect.
One more thing. Don't move. One more thing. Hold on a second. Yes. Well, I wanted to say thank you to my executive technical support person. For 46 years, she supported me. Okay, for 46 years, this assistant professional technical supporter supported me making all of these kind of things happen and has not kicked me out yet. Susan, can you come here? Thank you, Susan. You want to say something? No. No. Anyway, thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, absolutely.
He has a little base.
Yeah, it has a base, but
So
we will fix it.
don't worry.
Get that straightened out. Is this yours?
Thank you very much.
Here, I will walk back there.
So going off script because he doesn't know that the surprises aren't done yet, but we'll get back to him when he gets back in the room. So anyways, I will go through the VoIP Hurricane Net, some best practices in in tropical storm and other tropical systems that aren't hurricanes. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about our blizzard up in New England because there's some interesting parallels to it. Obviously, rain versus snow, but there's a lot of things you got to think about from a response and communications perspective that goes on during the blizzard. So with that, how many folks have heard of our VoIP Hurricane Net on amateur radio? So a couple of hands. I'll get into our main mission is to provide surface reports to the National Hurricane Center by any means necessary. Obviously, we love the amateur radio reports, and that's job one, but we don't just look at the amateur radio reports. We certainly look at APRS weather stations, but we'll look at non-amateur radio weather stations, social media, et cetera. We'll walk through that as we go through the presentation. We also are working on linking in other VoIP modes besides Echolink and IRLP into our network. We're looking to bring EOCs, Red Cross, Salvation Army, other agencies, perhaps Weather Service forecast offices, together with the Hurricane Center on our network when that infrastructure is available. We do disseminate the Hurricane Center advisories and updates, and we have backup systems in case our system goes down. Our policy for activation is to activate whenever there's a hurricane and some means of getting surface reports to the Hurricane Center. Amateur radio, of course, is the best and preferred way, but we will scour whatever we can across the internet that looks accurate and precise to provide data into the Hurricane Center. And we'll self-activate as needed. If a hurricane suddenly intensifies unexpectedly or another agency wants our support, we will do that as needed. We meet on the Star WX Talk node 7203, IRLP 9219. Right now, the KC5FM-R system helps us to bring in All-Star and a whole bunch of other modes, which I'll talk about later in the presentation. Our net management team, there's a number of us that when there's tropical weather outlooks, tropical advisories and discussions, et cetera, we monitor those, and then we will make our activation plans coordinating with WX4NHC when those activation plans are in place from the WX4NHC team. We talked about what happens when a system unexpectedly intensifies. We use a Telegram app for coordination between our net management team and our net controls, and we're always trying to prepare our participants all across the Atlantic Basin and even to an extent the Eastern Pacific and out towards Hawaii if hurricanes are potentially going to strike their area. We have a monthly VoIP Hurricane Prep Net in the non-hurricane season months of December through May, and then in June through November, we meet weekly. You can check out our website, voipwx.net. We meet on Saturday evenings, on the first Saturday of the month in the non-hurricane season months at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. In the hurricane season months, it's 8 p.m. Eastern Time weekly on Saturday evenings. A few technical tips for you. One thing that comes up often with Echolink is conferencing is on by default, and we actually have a script that will disconnect stations to have conferencing enabled because they are potentially could cause unintentional interference. So we provide that script to prevent that unintentional interference, make sure that's disabled when you are using Echolink. And there are ways with repeaters to eliminate the repeater ID and courtesy tones from passing over the network. And Tony VK3JED, who is our technical coordinator, his email on the website can help. I mentioned the KC5FM system that brings in the various VoIP modes. I always mention the latest software versions for Echolink, and it is actually a bit dated, but still the latest version is from May 17th, 2025, 2.4.142, and this is just the change list of all the things they have fixed in the software. There's also a web app on Echolink, and the web app link URL is right here, webapp.echolink.org. For those that want to use it from the website. That system has worked out pretty robust as well. You can also get Echolink on your cell phone or on Apple or Droid. You have to have an amateur radio license to be able to still use the app. The latest versions are from March of last year. I checked a few days ago. Those are still the latest versions of the app. The VoIP modes for the VoIP Hurricane Net. We've been doing some work to as I mentioned, we have the KC5FM repeater system that brings in all of these modes today. All-Stars, some versions of DMR, D-Star, YSF, XNDN, P25, M17, the alphabet soup of VoIP. So these are a number of the modes that get brought in. We're looking to actually integrate it into our network. We had some issues. These systems tend to run on virtual machines. So I had to take some effort with the provider of our virtual machine to get access to it, which was completed last fall. Then we had Hurricane Melissa. This project went on the side. Our next steps is to get a new virtual machine that will allow us to then get the login details to our tech coordinator, Tony, and then we're going to get an all-star server node number such that we are then able to integrate all the modes directly into our network. I've had a few questions come up about Starlink. And what's the VoIP Hurricane Net going to do with Starlink? Well, think of Starlink as you have Xfinity Internet, you have Verizon Fios, et cetera, and then you have Starlink. Starlink is basically an internet provider, but by satellite. With the dish equipment, whether it's the larger dishes or I just recently got, I guess I was a good boy this Christmas, a gift, a Starlink Mini, and I set it up. Literally within 15, 20 minutes, it can give you internet when you're just out in an open field or you lose internet where you are, it can give you the internet connectivity such that you can then put an Echolink, IRLP, All-Star, use VoIP mode here to connect in with Starlink. So the Starlink has a full setup for home stationary or mini operation, as I mentioned. It can be an expensive service, around $50 per month, but you can pause it and they basically only charge you a couple of dollars a month to keep it active. So it is basically, though, an ISP, an internet service providing mechanism. In terms of how it integrates with amateur radio, it's all the same modes, but you're using that as your internet. That's basically very high level in a short couple of minutes what that is. And then these are network radios that I've mentioned before in other conference presentations. They basically allow you to, these are almost like cell phone radios that are great for using for Echolink. They're great for other things that aren't necessarily amateur radio related, like Zello apps, et cetera, so that your phone isn't tied up with those VoIP modes. They can be taken apart and you can use basically radios for that. Obviously they're from China, but these prices are essentially the same as they were last year, so the tariffs or whatever's going on hasn't really affected this. So the pricing is the same and they might be useful depending on your application. So from a VoIP perspective, we're searching everything, and Julio and others have mentioned it. We'll use Zello if there's a Zello usage in the local affected area. We do monitor NWS chat just to see how the reports are going from there and not duplicating what they're seeing, because that data will eventually get to the Hurricane Center. We use the chat apps, Telegram, WhatsApp, Slack, all the social media outlets you can think of, Facebook, X, Blue Sky, TikTok, Instagram, the online weather stations, public safety feeds that are available on the internet. All these ways to gather and centralize and provide information. We've even gone as far as with Cuba to get on their Telegram channel, use Google Translate to translate the information, send it to Julio, because they may not be seeing that spotter info that's coming in unless the office is talking and giving that back to the Hurricane Center. I know it's not necessarily, you think, well, why is that amateur radio? It's amateur radio because we're really good at collecting that data. That's why it's amateur radio. And we can even have other hams outside of area do some of these things, bring in reports, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So these are just all the ways we can provide situational awareness, which if we could provide good situational awareness, when things fail, agencies are going to be more likely to use us. But if we just wait for things to fail to have a mission, we're going to be waiting a long time. Things still do fail. Hurricane Melissa, we can go on, but they don't fail as much as they used to. But they still do and always will. So this is where I think we can really help. We've become basically a virtual communications and virtual situational awareness support group using all of these different modes to give reports. During the last hurricane season, roughly over 280 reportable criteria reports. So using the SKYWARN reporting criteria, very similar to the criteria in Bobby's Hurricane WatchNet video. Measured wind gusts 40 miles per hour or greater, wind damage, river stream urban flooding, rain gauge reports, etc. All that kind of information is what we're forwarding on via all these modes. And we're looking for net controls and folks to help us monitor all these modes. A lot of us, a few of us in the net management team, the net controls, some of the participating stations are monitoring, but we're really looking to have folks do more of it. And we're going to be pushing PR on this later this month into early May to try to get more folks to join us and provide training on what we do and so on. These are the activations over the last 5 years. There were 4 total systems we activated for, resulting in 8 total activations. So, like for example, with Hurricane Melissa, we activated 4 different times for 4 straight days with some breaks in between as Melissa went through Jamaica and then eastern Cuba and then the Bahamas and then to Bermuda. That was a very long week. So give you some examples of things there. I want to talk a little bit about some hurricanes around Florida. So this was Hurricane Idalia. It was weakening at the time of landfall, but it still had several 100,000 folks that lost power. But it also hit a rural area that even though there's no stranger to hurricanes, it was a rare incident for the Big Bend to get hit. Then it seems like after they got hit once, they got hit a couple more times after that. However, we got some key reports from an amateur radio operator in Key West who had folks in the Perry, Florida area. Well, here's the other thing I want to note. Notice the gap in weather stations where this landfall point is. So the nearest station was an airport ASOS all the way up here in Perry, not really near the coast. It was weakening and it was losing more steam as it got over land. You know, this Big Bend area, as I mentioned, they got hit hard with Helene and Milton in 2024. So lack of surface observations is a key. This was in the Hurricane Center report. The estimated peak intensity at landfall is 100 knots, but there's some uncertainty because of the lack of surface data and what was happening with Idalia at the time of landfall. So, you know, the structural damage seemed to indicate at least 100 mile per hour gusts, but there's some questions. And so having weather stations, the more reports that are available, the better the reporting is post-event to know what really happened. These are some of the damage photos, some of the structural damage that was found over social media. This was from the Florida State Guard with some of the damage in locations in that Perry, Florida area. And then we talk a bit now about Hurricane Helene, which you can see the wind gusts over 100 miles per hour and all the hurricane force wind gusts, Florida and southern Georgia, but it will be most remembered way inland, right? Western North Carolina, hurricane force wind gusts, and all the significant flooding. And I think it was one of the quintessential examples of how amateur radio support in this era is working. If folks listen to the W4HTP Broadcastify link during Helene, what were they doing? They're doing support logistic communications for the relief efforts, but also the big thing was situational awareness for the people that were coming into the area, for the locals that were in the area, and to feed that up into other, the other parts of the area. Not to mention having that Broadcastify feed up was really helpful in allowing folks to actually hear what was going on. This was some of the damage in Georgia. This was obviously the significant flooding that happened all across Swannona to Asheville, North Carolina. Devastating. I know they're still recovering today. And then, of course, Hurricane Milton, not far from the Orlando area, affecting the Tampa Bay area, with the highest wind gusts of 109 miles per hour in Bradenton, Florida. I know we have a ham in Bradenton, Florida in the audience. So this was kind of some of the damage. This was an antenna from a ham that I've known for years who used to live in New England. It seems like there's quite a few Florida hams that used to live in New England. KA1WBE, who had one of his antennas blown down from the high winds in Bradenton. And then, of course, the damage to the Tropicana Field Dome and the cranes that were in Tampa. These were some of the damage reports out of St. Petersburg. And then Treasure Island, Florida, some of the key damage there. That brings us to this year and the kind of marquee storm for 2025, Hurricane Melissa. A Category 5 hurricane that also made landfall in eastern Cuba, the Bahamas, and Bermuda, as I mentioned previously. 4 activations over a 4-day stretch. We used our multiple modes to gather a lot of information. So this was on social media, St. Elizabeth. This was the roof torn off of a school in St. Elizabeth. These were some pictures of flooding, and look at this kind of damage from drone footage from one of the media outlets that was specific to Jamaica. Here in St. Elizabeth, there was structural damage videos from Montego Bay, Jamaica Airport, and the hotels that were damaged. I even saw a statement from one of the Jamaica folks from Hyatt Hotels saying they were trying to open right around this time of 2026, and now they pushed that date out to November 2026. I don't know if that ended up really happening or if they got pulled in at all, but it gives you the idea of the significant destruction that happened on Jamaica. We did have hams reporting in, including a ham from Detroit, Michigan, who was monitoring some radio feeds in Jamaica and feeding that information into us. And not only that, when we got that information from him, we got the same information from social media outlets. So pretty incredible how we were able to pull all that information together. These were the reports that we got from a Telegram channel. It was all in Spanish. I don't know Spanish, so I would literally take the messages that came in, I'd use Google Translate, and I got all of this information around the wind gusts, highest of which that we could find at least, 116 miles per hour in Santiago, Cuba province, 78 miles per hour at Guerrero. This one was actually a private weather station, 77 miles per hour in Guantanamo, and so on. You can see some of the big rainfalls of 10 to almost 15 inches, and the social media reports of structural damage, trees down, etc., is sent into the Hurricane Center. In the Bahamas, there was one island that really got very close to the eye, very close to the inner core of Melissa as it was going through the Bahamas, and that was in Crooked Island. Pittstown, Crooked Island, their peak wind gust was 88 miles per hour. And two of the advisories, these reports that we sent into Julio and the Hurricane Center, showed up in advisories. And this was just a summary of reports out of Bermuda, including wind gusts as high as 88 miles per hour at Flicks Beach, 98 miles per hour at a slightly elevated site on the western end of the island at the National Museum of Bermuda. This is the type of information that we try to forward on to Julio and team. We're working on net controls. We're working on the new multi-mode VoIP technology that we talked about to bring in all the amateur radio modes directly into our net, and working on the training resources for that. We need reports from first-hand stations. And even if the first-hand stations don't have damage exactly where they are in the affected area, but they may know where to look to find what else is going on and feeding that into us, that's huge. Because the folks that are in the affected area know the local area better, though we do the best we can to kind of pull in that information from where we are. Talk briefly about hurricanes, right? That's when the Hurricane Watch Net, the VoIP Hurricane Net, and WX4NHC are staffed. But certainly tropical storms that may be below hurricane strength that don't cause hurricane net activations can have some significant impacts with flooding, wind damage, etc. The size and intensity of the storm, the size in particular could have impacts of how much area is hit and how intense it actually ends up being at the end of the day. Many of the tropical systems can interact with other systems that, as they transition, especially up in New England, to be post-tropical, they can be worse than when they're actually tropical systems. This was Tropical Storm Henri as an example. In my area, New England, we had close to 80,000 without power. In Rhode Island, we had wind gusts of around 70 miles per hour. It was briefly a Category 1 hurricane. It weakened a bit as it approached Rhode Island. However, the Hurricane Center was active because in this case it was thinking it was going to be a hurricane landfall. It weakened a little bit, but the net stayed on the air. We combined our VoIP Hurricane Net into our local network in New England. These were some of the damage photos, and then Hurricane Specialist Stacy Stewart thanked us all for the observations and thanked Julio and team for the reports. Many of the reports were used in an advisory. And this was a tropical storm. So there are times, not that we may have all the nets and everything up from a hurricane perspective, this information is helpful to the local offices who can then feed it to the Hurricane Center, or if it's a case where it's a hurricane and it weakens just below threshold, but we have nets active, if there's reports coming in, we will keep things up so that we can pass the information on to the Hurricane Center. The best practices for tropical systems, make sure you're prepared, but don't assume the media and other agencies have it covered. We are a trusted source, so we can provide situational awareness and disaster intelligence for folks, even in these situations, and a force multiplier. And then if communications are lost, we're in that better place to be in position to do things. So now I'll spend the last portion of the presentation on the blizzard of 2026 and a quick Southern New England recap. And you're saying, well, why are we talking about blizzards at a hurricane conference? Well, if I didn't tell you this was a blizzard here, what does this look like? It might just look like a hurricane to you. It's got a little eye feature, etc. However, what causes this type of storm meteorologically, and I'm only going to spend about 30 seconds on it, is different kind of energy, baroclinic energy versus barotropic energy when it's a tropical system. But we can get these intense systems that can rival Category 1, 2 hurricanes in terms of winds. And then, of course, we can get the snow, feet of snow. In my area of New Bedford, which is right along here in the south coast, I had 37 inches of snow. It's the first time since I lived in my city where they couldn't keep up with the plowing to the point that my street didn't get plowed till about a day and a half later. And I've been through probably a dozen blizzards, and it's the first blizzard that had ever happened. So this was very intense. And we had fairly short notice. It wasn't until really Friday morning. I mean, by Thursday afternoon and evening, I was like, I think we're going to get a blizzard. But a couple of the models were still holding out, reliable ones. But by Friday morning, it kind of locked in, and it was like, we're in trouble. The winter storm watches went up, started with the southeast coastal New England area, then expanded to the rest of the area. Blizzard warnings soon thereafter, mostly for eastern Mass, Rhode Island, and central Mass, and the northeast Connecticut. And we got ready to do our nets, not only for the Weather Service, but we've had increased partnership with Massachusetts Emergency Management to the point where they want to potentially host our amateur radio efforts at the state EOC when certain criteria is met. And I think if we had been a little bit further along with some of the things that we need to do to get people into the state EOC per their protocols, we probably would have had it for this blizzard, but we weren't quite ready for that yet. We did, however, provide ICS 205s to the state EOC, and we heard it was very appreciative to know what we were doing and what frequencies we were using. And we also utilize VoIP, which we also mentioned in our system. Our New England reflector system is much like the WX Talk system. These are some of the damage photos that you'll see as we go through the pictures here. We had our blizzard net starting Sunday evening through Monday evening. We forwarded over 1,000 reports to the Weather Service, State Emergency Management, media partners, etc. We had cars stuck in roadways due to snowfall rates. So if you think about it, we had 37 inches of snow and about 35 inches of it fell in about 24 hours. So think about that for a minute. It paralyzed the area for a period of time, and we had a travel ban in Rhode Island before the blizzard hit, but in Massachusetts, the travel ban wasn't until towards the latter part of the storm. We did have thunder snow. We had snowfall rates up to 5 inches per hour. At my location in New Bedford, I had 8 inches in 2 hours, and we had 6 flashes of lightning from the thunder snow. So we had reports rivaling 40 inches of snow. We had wind gusts, hurricane force, and the wet snow was also of a wet consistency, so we had close to 300,000 without power. These are the photos from Jim Ashley from Whitman, Mass. These are some of the higher-end snowfall reports, including 41 inches in Fall River, some of the wind gusts as high as 89 miles per hour from a fellow Hams weather station in New Bedford. You see some of the ASOS reports that were hurricane force, wind gusts of 82 miles per hour at Sagamore Beach, and then all the damage reports. This was a photo from Nantucket, and I can tell you Nantucket can really weather the high winds because they get it often. This was probably the most tree damage I'd seen reported in Nantucket in years, and that's just because of how the storm was of that intensity. Want to briefly mention the Aries Resource Net concept. It builds on concept of SKYWARN nets, where they were getting us the snowfall reports and all the SKYWARN data, but talking about power, whether they had it or not, whether they had damage at their location or heard of damage elsewhere, and providing that information in a resource net fashion. They had close to 75 check-ins. They collected all this information. Here's some of the photos of damage in West Falmouth, Mass. And more photos here. These were cars stuck in the snow in Plymouth. Route 24, which is a major thoroughfare in Southeast Mass, was closed due to stuck cars. There was an operation with the Mass DOT and Mass State Police through the overnight hours into Tuesday morning to get all those cars removed. Some of the tree damage here in Brewster, Mass from the Cape. Want to mention our great partners at ARRL because they were quick to check in with us about getting a news article posted, which was posted within 24 hours of them asking. We had a more detailed article in our ARES, Amateur Radio Emergency Service e-letter. This was a photo right at my house of the snowfall. We even had a smaller tree branch down on my brother's car. Luckily, no damage to the car. Some of the power line work that was being done in Pembroke, Mass. So giving you some idea and some PR about what we were doing in New England. And we also got some major PR from the Weather Channel, which we have a short 1-minute clip to play here.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a nuisance, you know, when you think about it, because we're just getting people back online. And my good buddy, my great friend, Rob Aceto, who's a ham radio operator, a SKYWARN spotter for Taunton, he just said, Cantori, Massachusetts has dropped below 200,000 customers. And Alex, you know, I want to take a second to, you know, when we get all these observations and these different snowfall amounts from all these different areas, you know who's behind all that? It's the SKYWARN spotters. It's the ham radio operators. Because when people can't communicate, phone lines are down and everything like that, that's all we got. That's all we got. And I cannot thank those guys enough for how hard they work, how much information they get to us. So I had to give a shout out to Rob and all my friends. Rob's always out there. They do great work. Anyway, listen, guys, again, we're below 200,000. We're making headway here. As Alex talked about, a little nuisance storm coming in tomorrow. Could be an interesting, kind of late rush for this area. So let's keep an eye on it for you. As you can see, Plymouth, Barnstable counties still leading the way with most of those outages. But you know what? We're making headway. I love it. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a nuisance, when you think about it, because we're just getting people back online. And my good buddy, my great friend, Rob Aceto, who's a ham radio operator, a SKYWARN spotter for Taunton, he just said Cantori, Massachusetts has dropped below 200,000 customers. And Alex, I want to take a second to, when we get all these observations and these different snowfall amounts from all these different areas, you know who's behind all that? It's the SKYWARN spotters. It's the ham radio operators. Because when people can't communicate, phone lines are down and everything like that, that's all we got. That's all we got. And I cannot thank those guys enough for how hard they work, how much information they get to us. So I had to give a shout out to Rob and all my friends. Rob's always out there. They do great work. Anyway, listen, guys, again, we're below 200,000.
Because of how we executed with the data that we were able to present to folks. So with that, this is more information on our net, some of our links from the VoIP Hurricane Net perspective, some IRLP and Echolink information, our Groups IO email list, and some of our contact information. So some of the email addresses of the key folks within our staff. And then just a quick history lesson about Josh is our current person playing the role of emergency management. I know he has some additional responsibilities and a new expanded title. Mike Corey was previous to him, and then Dennis Dura as well. And Dennis is also our assistant VoIP Hurricane Net Director of Ops as well. So just wanted to throw that in there. Now, I had one other thing, because we had the special presentation planned. I wanted, and Julio had to step away for a moment. So before I'm done, and I know I'm a couple minutes over, but we will try to make up the time. So someone in this room, we talk about Julio and all the efforts at WX4NHC up here in Florida, and we are privileged to have been able to see Julio at the Hurricane Center, be treated as one of the team members, all of the hurricane conferences of so many years, his presentations over many years, his one here in New Orleans, and so on, the dinners and such that we would do after hopefully a successful conference and so on. But this one right here is a photo from our local National Weather Service office in Norton back in 2018, because Julio did not only a presentation at our ARRL New England Division Convention in 2018, he also did a presentation for our Southern New England Weather Conference in 2009, which really made people realize up in New England, some of the partner agencies, how much we do. An award from this very National Hurricane Conference from Max Mayfield, and an award from the Dayton Hamvention literally last year. So we thank Julio for all his support, friendship, and sharing of skills for the benefit of the amateur radio community and the community at large, and you have made a world of difference. And Julio needs to come up here one more time, because I have something for him. And this is, I'll read the plaque here. This is on behalf of the VoIP Hurricane Net, Eastern Massachusetts Aries, and the New England ARRL Division. We recognize WD4R Julio Ripoll's 46 years of excellence in community service and founding of the WX4NHC and Hurricane Ham program. Julio?
Thank you, Rob.
Our pleasure.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being a trusted friend and partner, and so thrilled to have been involved in all of what you've done
Couldn't
over
have done it without
20
you
plus
guys.
years. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Here,
Oh, let's take a picture.
Leave on the wall of the post office in an hour.
Okay.
Not just in Florida, but in New England as well. Anyways, so that's my presentation. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move on to SATERN. They have a video to start with, so what we're going to do is I'm going to get the video going. We have W1WCN Joe Badsett with us, who will be the presenter, but we'll kick off with the video, and then we'll get into a few PowerPoint slides on SATERN.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to join you as a part of the Amateur Radio Forum at the National Hurricane Conference. My name is Ian Anderson, and I serve as the Director of Emergency Disaster Services and Service Extension for the Salvation Army's Intermountain Division, covering Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and Montana. I'm also involved with the Salvation Army's International Emergency Services, which supports disaster response efforts around the world. Today, I'd like to share three things. A short overview of the Salvation Army's global disaster response through International Emergency Services, IES, some observations from a recent response in Jamaica following Hurricane Melissa, which came around Halloween, and how communications, including amateur radio, satellite internet, and priority cellular networks, continue to play a critical role in our mission. The Salvation Army is active in more than 130 countries, and disaster response has become a core part of our mission for more than a century. Through IES, we support Salvation Army teams when disasters exceed their local capacity, providing personnel, logistics, and coordination to strengthen the response and recovery efforts. Deployments typically last 1 to 3 months and require specialized training in international humanitarian standards, in disaster operations, logistics and safety, and just general cross-cultural coordination. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to deploy to Jamaica as a part of a third rotation of IES personnel following Hurricane Melissa. By the time we arrived, the response had shifted into sustained relief and early recovery. Local teams had already been deeply engaged, providing food, water, supplies, and emotional and spiritual care. Our role was to strengthen logistics, support distributions, and help coordinate ongoing operations, and really help the territory set up long-term recovery. As many of you know, communications are always one of the biggest challenges in a disaster environment. In the aftermath of a disaster, communication systems are often disrupted, cell networks are damaged or overloaded, power outages can last for days or weeks, internet access can be unreliable and non-existent. Even when systems begin to come back online, they're often strained. These challenges were especially evident in parts of Jamaica, particularly in rural and mountainous communities. They don't expect to get power till May in some of these communities. One of the most encouraging developments during that response was the use of satellite-based communications, particularly Starlink systems. Through a partnership with Red Lightning, a nonprofit that we've now partnered with since 2010 with the earthquake in Haiti, we were able to establish reliable connectivity in areas where traditional infrastructure just wasn't available yet. And while that connectivity supported coordination between teams, one moment really stood out. In a rural community where the Salvation Army serves as a central gathering place, we were able to establish a Wi-Fi connection at the core community center. Within minutes, the community filled that whole area, connecting with friends and family for the first time since the landfall of the hurricane. It's just a reminder that communications isn't just about supporting our operations, it's about connecting people. As we've expanded connectivity in disaster environments, we've also been strengthening how we coordinate internally. Communication isn't just about getting a signal, it's about sharing information, making decisions, and managing operations across teams. We're continuing to adopt tools that help us coordinate incident management teams, track resources, support casework and distributions, and manage volunteers across large geographic areas. Haven't even talked about using AI yet. Platforms like Microsoft Teams and similar tools are helping us stay connected, improve coordination, and ultimately serve communities more effectively. At the same time, we're building on our historic communications capabilities, including SATERN. Amateur radio has long played a vital role in disaster response, providing reliable communication when other systems fail. Through SATERN, volunteers have supported disaster operations, health and welfare messaging, and critical communications during major incidents. Today, we see SATERN as a part of a broader communications ecosystem. alongside satellite internet and priority cellular networks like FirstNet. For example, during the Maui wildfires in 2023, FirstNet provided reliable priority communications when traditional networks were heavily congested. We also partnered with ITDRC, the Information Technology Disaster Resource Center, who equipped our teams with FirstNet Wi-Fi hotspots, iPads, and other tools with very short notice. That support was critical for our casework teams working in the disaster resource centers, helping survivors navigate assistance in real time. Reliable connectivity allowed us to coordinate with partners, process information, and serve survivors more effectively in a really complex environment. But technology alone, you guys know, is not just the solution, right? It's not the only solution. The most important component of disaster communications will always be the people. Trained volunteers and responders who can adapt, problem solve, and keep communication flowing when systems fail. That's where the amateur radio community continues to play such an important role. The Salvation Army deeply values its partnership with amateur radio community. Your reliability, flexibility, and willingness to serve make a real difference in disaster response. As we look ahead, we see continued opportunity to strengthen that partnership, combining traditional capabilities with emerging technologies to better serve communities in times of crisis. Disasters are becoming more frequent and more complex, but one thing that remains constant is the importance of strong partnerships. We're grateful for the role that each of you play in helping communities stay connected when it matters most. If you're interested in learning more about how to get involved, I'd encourage you to reach out to your local Salvation Army Emergency Disaster Services team or director. We'd love to connect and explore how we can work together. As we look ahead to hurricane season, wildfire risks, I have to say that for my division, and the challenges our communities may face, please know that we are praying for your safety, your work, and the communities you serve. We're grateful to stand alongside you, serving together, supporting one another, and helping our nation navigate whatever may come next. Thank you.
Now we'll pull up Joe's presentation.
While he does that, let me say good afternoon, team. It's good to be with you. Original projection for landfall for me was supposed to be 4:20. We now have a kind of uncertainty of about 10 minutes. I'll do my best to get us there to projection. So I'm going to skip through several bits of the slides because Ian did a fantastic job of setting things up, but I'd like to clarify a few things for you because you may not understand the relationship between the Salvation Army and the Salvation Army Team Emergency Radio Network. Those members that are in SATERN are not members of the Salvation Army. The Salvation Army is made up of what are called officers. You can think of them as pastors or clergy. There are also soldiers. That would be the laity of the Salvation Army Church. SATERN members, I would say a very small percentage of them are actually members of the Salvation Army. Then the Salvation Army is separated into what are called territories. In the United States, there are 4 territories. Some countries, the entire country is a territory, say Japan. In each of those territories, there are divisions. Divisions might be a state. There's a Florida division. But I've listed here a map of the 4 territories, the East, the South, the Central, and the Western, and you can see geographically they don't really always make sense. The Eastern Territory is really the Northeast, the Southern Territory is really the Southeast, Central is kind of North Central, and West is the West. And then I've listed there for you the Southern Territory, and you'll notice there that it says Southern Territory SATERN, because that's the primary SATERN territory that is going to respond in a hurricane. Now the others may assist, but that's the primary. We do have a memorandum of understanding with the ARRL, and we do have a national headquarters that oversees all 4 territories, but they really don't have any authority. They're more a facilitator of the other territories working together, and those territories work, by and large, independently. You can see some of the voice nets that we do have for the international Salvation Army Team Emergency Radio Network. And then here we have the Southern Territory, and we have a served agency. We serve at the pleasure of the Southern Territory headquarters in Atlanta. So in Southern SATERN, which is a subset of International SATERN, if I haven't confused you enough. We operate independently from International SATERN, but our members in the Southern Territory SATERN are grandfathered into International SATERN. Of course, this is because we all know that radio waves are not respecters of boundaries. So when we partner with different groups, we're going to cross those boundaries with radio waves, and just because Southern Territory may activate, we will have International SATERN members help support us. We did have an ongoing net for the Southern Territory. We don't have that right now. We stood down at the end of hurricane season because that's primarily the way we respond with HF communication. At the divisional and local level, they're going to operate autonomously. So if there's something that impacts just a single division, the Southern Territory is not going to respond or activate. I've also listed there our SATERN coordinator and myself, the Southern Territory SATERN Assistant Coordinator for Operations. We do on the 5th Saturday, any month that has 5 Saturdays, on that Saturday, we do Zoom training for all SATERN members. We also work in conjunction with the Hurricane Watch Net. You heard Bobby refer to that earlier. And we do work very closely together. In fact, we work so closely that I'm the Assistant Coordinator for Operations for Southern Territory SATERN. I'm also on the Board of Directors for the Hurricane Watch Net. So we do work very closely together. Now, one of the things that happens when Hurricane Watch Net activates, International SATERN activates as well. However, there's an inherent problem with us depending on that. The primary purpose of SATERN is health and welfare or safe and well traffic. There is no health and welfare, safe and well traffic before a hurricane makes landfall. So the way it works is International cooperates with the Hurricane Watch Net in being able to provide relays, and we do provide some net control operators and work closely together there. However, you'll notice in a moment here that, let me go to the next one, we are going to activate at the request of the Southern Territory Disaster Services Director. We do not activate until then. And the way that activation might look is we will assume those frequencies that the Hurricane Watch Net uses when they stand down. And then we will operate on those frequencies in the Southern Territory for 12 to 72 hours after the Hurricane Watch Net secures. So that then if there is health and welfare traffic coming out, we will take that from them. The relationship between the two organizations is so good that many of the Hurricane Watch Net members continue on with us in that 12 to 72 hours. Now, how might that look? Well, we're going to provide health and welfare, safe and welfare messages, outbound only. This is at the request of the Salvation Army. We cannot take inbound requests for health and welfare or safe and well because the Salvation Army just does not have the personnel on the ground that could take those requests and go to check on Aunt Gertie with her lumbago at 124 Main Street. However, if she gets in touch with one of our team that's there on the ground, they can then get that safe and well health and welfare traffic out. We do that by radiogram or informal messages. And all of those are fed to either Bill or myself, and then we contact local Salvation Army officers who are pastors and can be there and provide that information. We do that so that we don't risk any personnel that are in the disaster area. Case in point, and this is, I'll change the names to protect the innocent, but it is a real story. That one time there was a request for health and welfare traffic that was passed into an area that had been hit by a disaster. Person's personal identifiable information and address was given. This happened to be a young woman who was estranged from her husband, and he had a restraining order against her. He happened to be listening on VHF and found out where she lived. This is why one of the big reasons that we don't take that inbound, because we want to protect that personal identifiable information. Then, our mission is tactical. We'll usually have a SATERN operator, if requested by the headquarters, to embed with their IMAT, their team that actually goes into the disaster area. At this point, we only have 2 credentialed SATERN operators that would go in with an IMAT. We only need 6. I'm 50% of them. But we go at the request of the Salvation Army. We never decide as SATERN that we're going to go into a disaster area. We always wait for that request. We're going to use primarily WinLink if we're going to use amateur radio, where somebody on the IMAT team would come to me, they would hand me the message, I will get into an ICS 213 or a radiogram, and it goes directly to the desk of whoever is at headquarters. This eliminates the need for a ham radio operator at headquarters. We have them there, and I'm going to come to that in just a second. We do have interoperability with several organizations. You do need to be credentialed with the Salvation Army to deploy with us, but you don't need to be credentialed to be in SATERN and be active from your home providing relays. We are, as you heard, moving more towards Starlink. We are taking a new idea in SATERN that started in the Southern Territory. It has moved to all of SATERN, that our primary thought process, our primary philosophy is we are not radio operators who happen to communicate. We are communicators who happen to use radios and Starlink and sat phones and texting devices that use satellites. You may have seen recently an article in On the Air magazine written by myself, Bill Feist, and one of the emergency disaster professionals with the Salvation Army about opportunities to be trained to work with the Salvation Army in SATERN. This new program is new. Now, one of the things that we're very excited about, and this is what I want to come to about amateur radio operators at headquarters, we are now also training Salvation Army professionals, the decision makers, and they are earning their ham radio licenses. In July, we rolled this out, and we had 12 pass their technician exam and 3 their general, so that the actual decision makers in the organization understand ham radio and know how to work with us. If you'd like more information, you can get this QR code and scan that. And then finally, shameless plug division, I do have as a door prize my book that came out in November, written by Creek Stewart. He and I wrote it together, Emergency Communication 101. This is written specifically for families and community groups who have no idea of what to do in an emergency with communication. But we have introduced that. It is one of the door prizes. But if you'd like, I have them on sale. You can see me afterwards. $20. Pardon?
Does the GMRS system from the family?
Oh, it covers all the radio services. Covers all of them. Yeah, $20 unsigned, $15 signed. Thank you.
All right, so now that brings us to our final presentation before the Q&A. By the way, we haven't handed out the door prize tickets yet, and there's a reason for that. If you stay to the end, that's when you get your ticket, so you get a chance to win. So I'll be handing those out while Josh presents. So I'm just going to pull up his presentation here. And we've been thrilled. I know Josh started at the league, and we were talking about this earlier in December 2021, and we've been thrilled to work with Josh over many years here with the Hurricane Conference, but also even during the blizzard. Josh and also Bob Inderbitson, and he was dealing with a personal issue at the time, pushed the PR out on that quickly, and Josh has done a great job working with all of the field organization, SECs, et cetera, section managers now, among his expanded responsibilities in the field org of amateur radio for the ARRL. So I welcome Josh Johnson, KE5MHV from ARRL.
Thanks, Rob. Glad to be with all of you today and excited to be back. It's a big year in amateur radio. It's a big year for ARRL. We're happy to be moving into our year of the club, and if you haven't seen that, I say moving into it. We're 4 months into it now, so it's been a good year so far, really promoting the advancement and the growth of clubs. And I'm not going to stay on the field service side. I'm going to try to stick with the MCOM side, because that's really my truth, where I came from and my background. Those of you that don't know, I spent 31 years in emergency preparedness and emergency response in Arkansas. The last 17 years as a county EMA director. And was on the State Communications Unit Working Group. I'm also now the ARRL representative to SAFECOM. If SAFECOM ever comes back together and we get to meet again, I figure that's going to be about 3 years down the road, or whatever, we'll see. So to give you a little bit of, well, let me go this route instead. So looking back on some of the value that amateur radio has brought to the table in 2023, and this is simply from the reporting we have captured from the field. I'm sad to say we're not capturing enough. We capture about 41%, about 50% of the field from the ARES groups around the country, and we know there's a lot of activity going on outside of ARES. We're just trying to capture areas. We understand that, there's other functions, there's other capabilities, but that's what we're capturing. But simply, the $18 million that we were able to capture of community value around the country speaks a lot. And when we tell somebody, say, well, we captured about 18 million, but we know there's probably at least double that. If you throw in SATERN's work, if you throw in Hurricane Watch Net, all the work that everyone does there that are not necessarily part of the ARES activity, the amateur radio community brings a huge asset to the communities, to their population, and to the people in front of them. Now, one of the things any of you hear me talk about, anytime you've heard me talk over the last 4 years, it's about building relationships. And what have we talked about here today? We've talked about SATERN and our cooperation, our MOU that we've had together for many years, which, by the way, we're working on finalizing a new one that should be happening in the very near future. We look forward to continuing that relationship, working with Rob, working with VoIP Net, working with Bobby with the Hurricane Watch Net. But all of the relationships we build at our level, at the national level, are really just simply to lay the groundwork for the most important relationships that you all do at your local levels. Having that relationship with the local emergency responders, having that relationship with your local weather service office, having that relationship with your local emergency management, that is the key to success in any of our amateur radio groups. If you can, as Rob has shown, what they've done with VoIP Net, where they're getting phone calls from different people, getting Cantori, mention them on the air, that's building those relationships. What's the saddest thing about all of our years and years and years of building relationships? Every one of us that's building a relationship has people out there that are keyboard warriors, I like to call them, who are tearing down the relationships of everyone in amateur radio. If you're a keyboard warrior and all you've got is something bad to say about amateur radio, shame on you. You're part of the problem. And I say it with passion because it's the absolute truth. You think you're tearing down the ARRL, you think you're bad-mouthing the ARRL, so be it, maybe you are, but guess what? You've got companies out there that amateur radio operators that don't have anything to do with ARRL are trying to build a relationship with, and guess what? They do a Google search for amateur radio, what do they find? Trash. And it tears up those relationships in one keystroke. Think about that. Pass that along. Pass that idea along, that if all you're doing is bashing, whether it be ARRL, whether it be a fellow ham down the street, whether it be whoever, if what you're there to do is to tear down one person, remember, you're not just hurting the one person, you're hurting the whole community. You're hurting the entire hobby. So I'll get off my soapbox there. And what we've been working on this year is working on looking at different ways to use different technology. Rob's working on an article for us. I'll put you on a hot spot since, you know, Rob's working on an article for us for the last half of the year talking about the VoIP net and all the technology used. We're looking at different ways and different technologies that are used in different aspects of the amateur radio IMCOM community. There are things to do to think outside the box. Us as amateur radio communicators is more important than just being a radio operator. There's more that we can provide. A lot of times we're technologists. I'm happy to announce and show the new graphics that were released about a month ago now for Amateur Radio Field Day 2026. As many people know, Field Day 26 for some people is a contest. For other people, it's an IMCOM exercise. But for most people, it's somewhere in between, a little bit of all of it. So we encourage you to get out, get active. I'm going to be around the rest of the afternoon. I'll be around tomorrow for the conference. So if anyone has any further questions, anything like that, I'll be glad to answer them. But I'm going to try to keep us as close to on track as I possibly can. But I want to thank you for being here today. Know this, that ARRL is here to support all amateur radio operators. And what we do is important. What we do is important for your communities. So I'll close with a final thought that I close most of my emails with. Thank you for all you do for your community and for amateur radio. Thanks.
All right, that is our last presentation. Julio has a couple of things, and then we just are going to have an open Q&A, then we'll let the live stream go, and then the door prizes. So that's why we handed out the tickets now, so we chain you here till the door prize drawings. So anyways, I'll turn it over to Julio and Lloyd.
All righty. Well, we just wanted to thank all the speakers who took all the time to do these presentations. And if you come up, Rob, Canadian Rob? Canadian Bob, sorry. Here you go. Joe Badsett. Brad, I'll give it to him at the office. Josh.
That sounds like another excuse to go back to the office.
Jim? Put it on automatic. Rob?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me tell you, we really appreciate all the time and effort they took to put all of this together, and we hope that you guys last a long time.
Yes, definitely for sure.
Here, let's get together for a picture. Dear? Dear?
One of her last acts of service.
There we go. She's coming. All right. Get closer.
There you go. It's got a zoom on it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Really thank you.
Thanks, Ron.
All right, so we'll open it up to questions on the live stream and in the room, and then when we're done with questions, we'll disconnect the live stream and we'll go into door prizes. No? There's a question in the back. Go ahead.
About you guys and your radio programs like WX4NHC and Hurricane Net. Have you thought about cooperating with like broadcast channels like Local 10? I see you had the Weather Channel. I see you were on the Weather Channel doing your presentation, and I'm a meteorology student at FIU, and I've never heard of WX4NHC or any amateur broadcast program. That's an opportunity a lot of meteorology students will love. And and we do broadcast meteorology tours and TV stations. And I think if your program reached out to local 10, including the National Association for Amateur Radio, I think if your programs reached out to the meteorologists at those TV companies, local 10, channel 7, channel 4, especially in places where hurricane prone, you would get a lot more reach and you'd be able to recruit a lot more volunteers. So, do you have any plans for that in the future?
So when you say local 10, you're talking about the local TV station here in Orlando?
No, local, I was naming
Miami.
Local 10.
Oh, it's Miami?
Miami.
So you're in the Miami area, okay. Yeah, so I'll answer part of it, then I'll let Julio answer. I can tell you in southern New England, what we do, so like during the blizzard, we are sending our reports directly through facilitation of prior NWS management, and then we've just maintained it from there since. We are sending our reports not only to the Weather Service, not only to State Emergency Management, but to every meteorological staff that covers that office. So Western Mass television stations, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Eastern Mass all get the reports. So they are, in southern New England, they're very aware of what we do. So we even get PR from our local media. What you're suggesting is doing that everywhere, and in particular doing with hurricanes, which I think is an excellent idea. And I'll let Julio comment some more. Yeah, go ahead.
Because I'm right by the National Weather Service Miami. They're on my campus along with the National Hurricane Center. So I didn't know you guys were operating from there at all. And I just think it would be like a good way to assemble volunteers, because I know a lot of people in the Miami area who would want to help, including with the National Association for Amateur Radio.
Can I briefly speak on that?
Yeah, please.
So,
But I have a follow-up question for her when you're done. Can you come up to the mic so everybody can hear you?
So we do have a news bureau with news division that puts out information through the National Weather Service, and we follow, or through ARRL. But we also follow news media where we're scrubbing information to help share in our news sources. But yes, it's something we could work with in the future to try to do more. Something we're always looking for outlets to get the word out, to get information out on what's happening and what's going on with that. Yep.
Anyway, thank you for those questions. And you do know that we are on the FIU campus, right?
Yes, I know
Okay.
FIU.
Very good. Yeah, every once in a while, if you look at the roof of the Hurricane Center, you'll see me up there tuning up an antenna. But we do have media that comes regularly into the Hurricane Center. I don't know if you've been inside the Hurricane Center. If you haven't, okay. So before you get to the main hurricane room where all the specialists gather, there's the media room, which has a movable glass wall. You've been in there? That's where we do PowerPoint presentations and all that stuff. And we do, the one thing that we cannot do is invite the media into our radio room. They have come in on special occasions when we have a big critical landfall, and they ask questions, take pictures, take video, and they're welcome to do that. But the reason we don't bring media in past the media room is because it could interfere with all of the different staff operations that are happening there. But we do welcome them, and every once in a while, we'll get one of the networks to send in a question or whatever, and they do come in. And we've had several of the meteorologists from the local TV channels come in and do an interview and all that. And in fact, some of them are actual ham radio operators. So you're welcome to come by one time. You do, if you want to come by and visit, you do have to go ahead of time.
After next on Tuesday of the National Weather Service.
You do have a tour scheduled?
Yes.
Okay, because there's no one's allowed inside during hurricane season.
Yes.
But before that, yeah, you can ask for a tour, and then they'll schedule it, and you can see everything in there. But thank you for your question.
And I'm going to ask you a question. Having sat through a very amateur radio-centric presentation, are you interested at all in amateur radio now?
Yes, I didn't want to broadcast as a broadcast meteorologist on TV because like I would have to wear makeup and I have like a bunch of skin conditions that wouldn't cover that. But this is a really good opportunity for those who want to broadcast. I have a lot of people in our organization, the Meteorology Club, who want to broadcast, who think about their futures and think about being on TV. But this radio broadcast would be a great opportunity to get like practice or to do like as your whole life career.
Exactly. So I think if you could stick around when we're done with the presentation and door prizes, I think it would be good to get your contact info, because I also think you may have others within your community to not only can help us with amateur radio hurricane response, but also become they can become licensed, they can help in that manner along with their careers, and we are looking for those kind of folks, and we need them desperately, not only just in the country, but internationally as well. And so you seem to have a passion about the weather. I have a passion on the weather side, even though my background is technology and engineering. My other hat that I came very close to wearing was meteorology.
I'm a meteorology student right now. I graduate in December with my bachelor's degree in atmospheric science.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that I chose the engineering path, but meteorology is still a second passion, so to speak. So, and so I think it would be good to connect with you, because I think you could maybe help us, and maybe we can help you, from the atmospheric science meteorology perspective. So I know we've got a number of questions in the live stream, but let's still focus on the room. Are there any other questions from within the room before I go to the live stream?
The other question is, you see, a few days ago, the geomagnetic storm affect the communication. I'm tracking every time, I'm tracking the space weather, but maybe sometimes the geomagnetic storm is very strong, is blackout, no radio, no internet, no TV, no nothing.
Yeah, so you can certainly get, if you get that kind of geomagnetic storm that really wipes out all communications, including TV, higher frequency, you probably got an event we haven't seen since, older times. But certainly some of the geomagnetic storms that we've had have hurt the HF communications. That said, sometimes the very, very low bands of HF or even VHF, UHF communications with internet connectivity, if it's not satellite-based, is still up, and that's why we all you can do is have a multi-layered approach to communications, so that you have enough tools in the toolbox where if some don't work, others are there. And I think that's one of the biggest things amateur radio brings to the table is it brings HF, but if that doesn't work, we can use the modern forms of voice over IP communications. We can use digital text communications. We even have mesh networking, which we didn't really talk about today. We don't have an expert around that uses the very, very high frequency microwaves to establish digital networks. So this is where amateur radio brings a lot of different capabilities to the table that if folks that get licensed and trained and know how to use them bring not just HF or not just VHF or not just voice, they bring a whole maybe half dozen to dozen set of tools of communications on top of your any professional grade communications. So I think that's the key, that one of the key things it brings. I don't know if others want to add something to that. Any other questions from the room? So let's hit the live stream questions. So I think the first question I have here is, do you see AI translation tools being robust enough to be reliable and useful to operators working to capture disaster intelligence info from Spanish and non-English speaking impacted areas? And I think the answer to that is certainly yes. I mean, AI isn't perfect, and we have some systems in southern New England where we can get excerpts of radio traffic that AI speech recognition brings to us. It does pretty well, but we have to usually listen to the recordings or sometimes get to the recordings if things that it produces in the transcript don't make sense. But it certainly has provided us a big vehicle to get more information, talked about a little bit of what we saw on the Telegram channels and whatever, and if there's other means that we can get that information, if it's in other languages, we can then have it translated as well. Another question, and this is for Josh, any updates on the ARRL courses? And Jim's bringing you a mic.
Well, basic, intermediate, and advanced, or basic and intermediate are up and running. Advanced has been put on hold right now, and we're looking at a couple of options there. So no further updates at this point.
Okay, and there was a question, another question also about, someone reached out asking if they could do a possible tech in a day class at the Hurricane conference. So interesting one, and it's actually a ham in my local area, which I'll follow up with offline on that question and whether that makes sense. And then there's a question about, is VAR-AC being looked at for disaster response in MCOM? VAR-AC is a form of using VARA for WinLink. I don't know, Julio, if you have an answer to that, or I think
I know of places that are using it fairly regularly.
Yeah.
So yes,
yeah.
it's definitely, yes.
We are using it to a degree in New England, though we're still, I would say, more packet than VARA, but VARA is coming on, and I myself want to learn more about it and have some of the equipment, just haven't had the time to set that up. So I think that was, unless I missed something here, I think that was all the questions on the live stream. Any other questions live stream or in the room here before we let the live stream folks go and move on to door prizes? I see.
Rob, real quick.
Yep.
Blue One Sparky asked, or even a couple of EECs. One of the limitations we have here is because of the size of the conference and as many conference rooms and things that they're using, there is some issues on space. So having enough space and time with conference rooms and scheduling that, and they're gracious enough to provide this space for us to do this meeting. So having the additional spaces to do all of that might be a little bit difficult.
Yeah, I agree, and again, it is offered to us at no cost, and these rooms are they're an expense to the conference. So if something like that was done, it would have to be off-site somewhere, local, probably working with local ham groups. Any other questions or comments? All right, so what we'll do is yes, there is an evaluation form at the bottom of the page for the live stream for those that want to give us online feedback. So we appreciate everybody that joined on the live stream today. I'm so glad that worked out real well. We love to have that. And the recording, this video will be available essentially shortly after the conference, right on the same video link. If people want to go back and review things or there's things that they are missed, they can catch it there, including for folks in the room. So we'll let our live stream folks go. Thank everybody there for joining, and for the folks in the room, hang tight for the door prize drawings. Thanks, everybody.
All right, you want to introduce these things?
Yes, and I have you have the cup of tickets. All right, where should we start? Does it matter?
There you go.
So we have two of these. We'll start with this one. This is battery backed up power light bulbs for folks. So we have two of these. We'll raffle one here, and it goes to the first thing.